Forest spirits. The first faint light of dawn struggled courageously to penetrate the thick, heavy leaden clouds overhead, casting a dim, spectral glow across the deserted and silent station. Overnight, a layer of snow had gently settled, covering the entire platform with a thick, icy silence, disturbed only by the faint fading tracks that vanished into the stark whiteness. A fierce, cold wind swept through the empty corridors, carrying a mournful, almost accusatory moan that seemed to seep into every crack and crevice of the aging, weathered structure. Inside, Derek moved with cautious deliberation, his boots crushing softly upon the frost-hardened floor as he approached the small, worn wooden desk near the grimy window. His trembling hand reached out slightly as he grasped the thermometer, the biting cold penetrating his gloves and numbing his fingers. Carefully, he pulled the fragile glass tube free, squinting at the mercury's reflection flickering faintly in the dim, muted light. The needle hovered dangerously low, much lower than he had anticipated. His brow furrowed beneath the thick fabric of his gloves as he adjusted his glasses and leaned in for a more detailed, closer look. 25 below zero. The reading was startlingly alarming, even for this remote, isolated outpost. The temperature had been cautiously decreasing over recent weeks, but this abrupt and dramatic plunge completely defied the slow, gradual trend that had persisted beforehand. Derek pressed his thickly gloved fingers gently against his lips, then cast a brief glance back toward the frosted window. Snowflakes floated down lazily, drifting aimlessly through the crisp air, seemingly unaffected by the sudden intense cold snap that had taken hold. However, this sharp and unnatural drop in temperature felt deeply unsettling, as if some unseen and invisible force was actively amplifying the freezing conditions. He stepped away from his cluttered desk and moved toward the battered old equipment lining the wall gauges, dials, all coated in a thin layer of frost, their mechanisms groaning softly under the growing strain of the cold. The radio, silent for several days, emitted a faint static hum, a ghostly echo of times when communication had been more reliable and routine. Now it sat unused, a relic of a bygone era long past. His hand, steady despite the bone-chilling cold, brushed through his graying hair, causing his brow to tighten with concern. Routine fatigue pressed heavily on him, yet a growing sense of unease gnawed persistently at his mind. The weather was indeed turning colder, that was clear, but such a sudden, drastic change was baffling and seemed almost unnatural. Something didn't quite add up. Something felt terribly wrong in that moment. The air surrounding him seemed to become denser and more oppressive, almost alive with an ominous, sinister presence that he couldn't fully explain or understand. He hesitated for a second before reaching again for the radio, pressing the button desperately only to find it unresponsive. No signal at all, just a constant, maddening static noise. Outside, the wind howled fiercely, rattling the old windows and stirring the snow into restless, swirling patterns that seemed almost animated by an unseen force. Inside, the oppressive silence grew heavy, broken only occasionally by the creak of aging beams or distant groans that echoed through the empty space. Making a decision to investigate the strange atmosphere further, Derek cautiously stepped outside, his senses heightened and alert. His movements were slow and deliberate, almost as if he was instinctively sensing an unseen presence or eyes watching him from the shadows. The vast snow-covered landscape stretched out endlessly in every direction, broken only by jagged, unnatural ice formations and the faint silhouette of distant mountains shrouded in thick mist that obscured their peaks. He paused to scan the horizon carefully when suddenly a faint flicker of movement caught his eye, irregular darting shadows skittering across the snow in quick, unpredictable bursts. They appeared to perform a strange dance just out of his direct line of sight, subtly shifting with the wind yet somehow remaining disturbingly unnatural. It was not merely the interplay of light and shadow, but something more purposeful and calculated in their movement. His breath fogged the cold air as he squinted into the darkness, trying to decipher what exactly he was observing. Suddenly, a gust of wind carried a faintly metallic scent that caused his nostrils to flare involuntarily. He tensed up, instinctively pulling his coat tighter around himself for reassurance. His gaze became more focused, and he cautiously moved closer to the edge of the station platform, eyes fixed on the snow-covered field ahead. The shadows flickered once more clearly now elongated jerky shapes that moved with an unsettling, almost mechanical rhythm and precision. His heartbeat quickened, yet he maintained a composed, impassive expression. The shapes might have been mere optical illusions or illusions created by fatigue and solitude, but the unnatural feel lingered in the frigid air. A tingling, prickling sensation slowly crept up his spine, making him acutely aware that something was deeply wrong. It felt as though an unseen presence was lurking just beyond the edge of what he could perceive, hiding just outside his line of sight. He instinctively glanced down at the snow near his boots, examining the surface intently. Small, irregular impressions disturbed the otherwise smooth layer scratches, perhaps made by claws or some tool, or maybe the remnants of something dragged across the icy ground. He crouched carefully, gently brushing aside a thin layer of snow, using his gloved fingers to investigate further. The marks appeared fresh and inconsistent with the familiar footprints he knew well, suggesting recent activity. They looked hurried, uneven, as if something had recently moved through this area in a rush. Suddenly, a faint growl pierced the silence around him, breaking the stillness. Derek immediately froze, his grip tightening sharply on his rifle, alert to the possibility of danger. From the corner of his eye, he caught a sudden flash of movement, a swift, low streak of gray fur disappearing quickly behind a mound of snow. His heart pounded intensely as a wave of heightened alertness sharpened all his senses, making him hyper-aware of his surroundings. He slowly lifted his gaze, carefully scanning the rugged terrain once more, searching meticulously for the source of the disturbance. At first, nothing was visible, just the swirling snow drifting in the cold wind and distant shifting shadows cast by the fading light. Then, out from behind a small cluster of icy jagged rocks, a dark silhouette gradually emerged. It appeared too large for a fox or a rabbit, yet too small and agile for a bear. His mind froze briefly, trying desperately to classify what he was seeing. Was it an animal, or something entirely different and unexpected? He paused, considering his options carefully. Moving closer might trigger it to run away, but remaining stationary felt equally dangerous. The biting cold penetrated through his layered clothing, numbing his fingers and toes, while simultaneously heightening his senses to a razor-sharp level. Every sound, every flicker of movement around him intensified his senses and heightened his alertness. Suddenly, a deep guttural growl shattered the tranquil silence, a warning that sent a chilling shiver down his spine. The shadowy figure slowly stepped into view, vague and obscured by darkness, yet undeniably alive and aware of his presence. Its silhouette was hunched and twisted, ears pointed sharply forward, eyes gleaming with a strange, almost hypnotic, unnatural light that seemed to glow in the gloom. The creature's imposing presence appeared almost intentional, as if it had been patiently waiting for him to arrive. His instincts screamed for him to retreat quickly, but he found himself frozen in place, unable to look away and simply staring in fascination. The creature's gaze was piercing, unsettling, as if it could see into his very soul. He cautiously raised his hands slowly, palms open and visible, attempting to signal that he meant no harm. The beast paused, responding with a cautious, almost curious tilt of its head, then gradually melted back into the shadows, vanishing behind the jagged rocks. The wind now howled louder than before, whipping snow into a frenzy and making the entire scene even more ominous and intense. The flickering, dancing shadows cast upon the snow seemed to twist and swirl in an eerie, unsettling manner, their unpredictable movements causing his stomach to tighten with a mix of fear and curiosity. He instinctively knew he should turn away. There was something about that creature's intense penetrating gaze that profoundly disturbed him on a primal level. Nevertheless, a strange and powerful compulsion kept his eyes fixed on the haunting scene, as if the presence of the creature had somehow unlocked a hidden deeper awareness of the wilderness's many secrets and mysteries. As he slowly turned back toward the distant station, Derek felt a persistent icy chill coursing through his body, not solely from the biting cold, but from the unsettling encounter itself. The peculiar shadows, the sudden sharp drop in temperature, and the presence of an unseen watcher hinted at something far beyond simple weather, phenomena something awakening deep within the frozen wilderness, lurking quietly just beyond the limits of human perception. Inside the station, the instruments monitored the ongoing descent of the thermometer, confirming an abnormal and relentless plunge into sub-zero temperatures. Outside, the faint flickering of shadows persisted like dying flames struggling in the snow, barely holding on. A powerful storm was rapidly gathering strength, and a heavy oppressive silence had descended over the vast, icy landscape. Yet, beneath that quiet, an entirely new understanding was beginning to emerge, one that promised to change everything we thought we knew about this mysterious frozen world. Derek's eyes remained fixed on the dark silhouette looming behind the jagged rocks, serving as a silent sentinel amid the endless, snow-covered landscape. His mind was racing with thoughts, realizing that this unsettling encounter marked only the initial stage of a much greater threat. The biting cold was more than just a harsh weather pattern. It signified something deeper, a warning. Underneath the icy surface, an ancient and unseen force was beginning to stir, and he had caught its first, subtle, almost imperceptible movements. Night had completely fallen over the remote station, cloaking the frozen terrain in suffocating darkness. A faint, intermittent flicker emanating from a dying lantern threw shifting shadows across the cracked, weather-beaten wooden walls. Outside, the oppressive silence was only occasionally broken by the distant groans of ice cracking and the soft whisper of wind sweeping over the snowdrifts. Derek remained motionless by the window, his gaze unwavering on the bleak horizon beyond the glass, where faint fleeting shapes flickered at the edge of his vision, shadowy forms that seemed to ripple and stretch, elusive yet persistently present. A subtle movement suddenly caught his eye, a slight, almost imperceptible shift across the vast frozen surface. Through the grime-streaked glass, he observed them, irregular shapes, barely distinguishable against the snow, drifting slowly and silently in the cold night. They moved with an eerily unnatural grace, skillfully twisting the stillness into a tense, almost otherworldly tableau that felt both mesmerizing and unsettling. His breath fogged up the cold glass window, and he thoughtfully pressed his palm against the icy surface, leaning in closer to get a clearer look at the strange figures outside. A deep shiver ran through him, not only from the biting chill of the winter air, but also from a growing, uncomfortable sense of unease that he couldn't quite shake. The shapes he observed didn't resemble any recognizable creature or familiar human silhouette. Instead, they lacked the smooth fluidity of living beings, appearing as fleeting, ghostly silhouettes, vague echoes of motion frozen in time, caught strangely in the corner of his eye. He blinked rapidly, trying to dispel the illusion or get rid of the sudden paranoia, but the uncanny forms persisted, shifting subtly as if aware of his gaze, almost alive with a purpose. Instinctively, Derek reached for his coat, his fingers trembling slightly as he grasped the stiff fabric, seeking some form of reassurance. The flickering lantern cast uneven patches of light across the room, distorting the shadows that stretched and warped across the interior walls, adding to the overall sense of disorientation. He then quickly grabbed his flashlight from the shelf, the cold, heavy metal feeling firm and reassuring in his hand, and moved cautiously toward the door. Every step he took was deliberate, muffled by the thick blanket of snow that had accumulated at the threshold, creating an additional barrier to whatever was waiting outside. Stepping outside, the frigid, biting air immediately struck him forcefully, piercing through the layers of his coat and freezing sharply into his bones. The crisp crunch of snow beneath his boots echoed loudly in the quiet, still night, each step heightening his senses and awareness of his surroundings. The snow lay mostly untouched, save for faint impressions, delicate traces recently pressed into the pristine white surface, suggesting recent activity. Derek knelt carefully, narrowing his eyes as he closely examined the subtle grooves in the snow. The footprints appeared irregular and inconsistent, not matching the typical shape or pattern of any known animal's paws. Some of the tracks seemed broader, almost dragging behind in uneven lengths, while others were sharp, precise, as if something had been carefully slid or dragged across the icy surface. The trail extended away from the station, meandering toward the darker, more ominous expanse beyond the limited reach of his flashlight's beam. His heartbeat quickened with a mixture of intense curiosity and creeping apprehension, tightening his chest. He slowly rose to his feet, his eyes scanning the surrounding area meticulously for any additional signs or clues. The oppressive silence seemed to weigh heavily on him, broken only by the distant faint crack of shifting ice, adding to the eeriness of the scene. His gaze flickered back and forth between the narrow trail and the distant horizon, where shadows grew thicker and deeper, gradually swallowing the faint outlines of the surrounding landscape. No signs of life or movement stirred the silent scene. No sounds or noises betrayed any presence nearby. Still, the trail seemed to call to him, urging him onward and compelling him to follow its uncertain path. He proceeded along the tracks with cautious steps, each one gently crunching in the fresh snow underneath. The heavy weight of uncertainty and doubt pressed down on him, making every movement feel increasingly sluggish and burdensome. His exposed skin prickled sharply with the biting cold, and a cold gust of wind carried a faint whisper, almost like distant voices echoing from a world slipping further and further into darkness. His grip on the flashlight tightened firmly, causing his knuckles to whiten as he held it. As he continued forward, the trail appeared to look freshly disturbed. Snow around the footprints was displaced, as if those marks had been made only moments earlier. These marks looked deliberate, almost inviting him to venture deeper into the wilderness. He hesitated for a brief moment, gathering his courage, then pressed on, the bright beam of his flashlight sweeping ahead into the enveloping darkness. The vast, desolate landscape remained entirely silent, still, and seemingly unyielding to any change. Suddenly, an almost imperceptible scraping sound caused him to freeze abruptly in place. It was faint and subtle, like claws gently dragging across the surface of ice. His heart started pounding fiercely within his chest, and he instinctively spun around, his eyes darting sharply into the surrounding shadows. The darkness remained perfectly still, yet the intense sensation of being watched grew stronger and more oppressive. He tightly gripped his flashlight, feeling the cold metal against his palm and the slight tremor in his fingers. Every nerve in his body became hyper-aware, alert for any movement. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a flicker of motion, more distinct and deliberate now. A quick fleeting shadow crossed behind a cluster of snowdrifts, almost concealed in the night. His instincts urgently told him to stay perfectly still, to listen carefully and observe every faint sign of movement around him, as if waiting for something unseen to reveal itself. The shapes he had glimpsed earlier seemed to hover subtly on the very edge of his perception, slipping just beyond the clarity of his sight and comprehension. Was it merely a trick of the flickering light, his own overactive imagination playing tricks on him? Or perhaps something more tangible, something potentially dangerous lurking nearby? He took a careful, tentative step forward, the sound of snow crunching beneath his boot echoing softly in the stillness. The trail veered slightly to the right, leading toward a narrow depression where the ice appeared thinner, darker, and more ominous, almost threatening in its presence. He hesitated briefly, torn between the innate curiosity urging him onward and the instinctual urge to retreat to safety. Still, something about the trail, an unspoken message or silent summons, compelled him to press further into the unknown, despite his hesitation. Suddenly, a gust of icy wind swept across the frozen surface, scattering loose snow into the air and momentarily obscuring his view. When the whiteness settled again, he saw it something small and moving just beyond the edge of the faint flickering light, as if waiting for him to notice. A faint flicker of fur or feather, or perhaps a fleeting shadow cast by the moonlight on a creature too swift to be easily identified. His breath fogged the air again as he stood completely still, eyes unwaveringly focused on the exact spot before him. The trail extended ahead into the darkness, deep into the cold, relentless wilderness that seemed to swallow everything. Whatever had left these marks had disappeared entirely into the night, leaving behind only faint, ghostly traces of its hurried passage. Nonetheless, a deeper sense of vulnerability gradually crept over him, sharper and more acute than the biting cold. He understood that whatever lurked out there was not merely an ordinary animal or a natural phenomenon. It was something else entirely, something unseen and unexplained, moving beneath the surface of the ice and snow, deliberately leaving subtle signs of its secretive presence. His mind raced with a myriad of questions, but only one undeniable truth stayed firm. The night had become infinitely more mysterious, and the shadows were beginning to hide secrets that might never be fully uncovered. A new realization took hold within him. This was no longer just an investigation of tracks or shapes, but a confrontation with the unknown itself, and he was now drawn into it. Turning once again toward the distant station, Derek's hesitant but determined footsteps echoed softly in the silent cold. The faint, tireless trail ahead called him to venture further into the enveloping darkness, urging him onward despite the uncertainty. He was aware that whatever lay beyond the horizon, be it a revelation about the harsh landscape, a profound discovery about himself, or the lurking danger concealed beneath the thick layer of ice, could fundamentally alter his understanding of everything. As he gradually distanced himself from the subtle glow of the station, the shadows around him seemed to ripple and shift subtly, almost alive, as if watching his departure, and patiently waiting for the precise moment to reveal what secrets they guarded. Derek paused for a moment at the crest of a snow-covered ridge, his breath visible in fleeting ghostly clouds against the icy air. The oppressive darkness pressed in from all sides, pierced only by the faint shimmering light of distant stars partially hidden behind heavy swirling clouds. His gaze carefully examined the faint trail stretching out before him, scattered, uneven footprints leading away from the station, then suddenly vanishing into a disturbed patch of snow. A dark smeared streak marred the pristine white surface, sticky and wet against the cold, indicating recent violence or struggle. His heartbeat quickened and he hesitated, caught between the urge to follow the trail deeper into the unknown, or to retreat to the relative safety and warmth of the station's shelter. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind swept over the ridge, carrying with it a faint mournful howl that seemed to echo from the depths of the icy abyss below. The distant yet unmistakable sound echoed through the cold night, a haunting reminder of the wilderness's relentless, uncaring nature. Every nerve in Derek's body tensed sharply as he strained to listen, his grip tightening involuntarily on his heavy coat. The storm was growing fiercer, and the shifting shadows appeared to ripple and dance with each powerful gust of wind, heightening his acute sense of vulnerability and unease. He moved with utmost caution, kneeling carefully beside the blood-stained patch of snow. The snow around him was thoroughly soaked, shimmering with crimson streaks that starkly contrasted against the pristine white background. As he gently lowered himself, His flashlight's beam caught a sudden flicker of movement, a small trembling figure caught in the pale, uncertain glow. It was a creature sprawled on its side, trembling violently from the cold and fear. Its fur was matted and clumped with ice, blood, and torn flesh, with chunks of tissue missing, exposing raw bleeding patches beneath. The pup's eyes, large and glistening with tears, locked onto him desperately, a mixture of terror and helplessness evident in its stare. It whimpered softly, a fragile, heartbreaking sound that pierced through the oppressive silence, symbolizing the fragile boundary between life and death in this unforgiving environment. Derek's hand hesitated uncertainly for a brief moment before reaching out in cautious curiosity. His fingers gently brushed against the icy damp fur, trembling slightly as he carefully pressed them into the creature's side. The small pup initially flinched, a shiver coursing through its tiny, fragile body, but gradually it began to relax under his gentle touch. The warmth of his palm contrasted sharply with the biting, frigid air that surrounded them, and a rush of conflicting emotions suddenly flooded him, mixed feelings of dread, deep empathy, and an intense, almost desperate urge to save the helpless creature. He understood he should probably leave it alone, call for help, or wait patiently until dawn, but something in the trembling, vulnerable body of the animal compelled him to act immediately. With utmost care, he carefully lifted the injured pup into his arms, mindful of the deep, jagged gash along its side. Its delicate frame felt nearly weightless in his hands, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility began to settle heavily on his shoulders. The pup whined softly again, this time more subdued, leaning into his chest, as if seeking reassurance and comfort. His gloved fingers gently brushed away some of the blood-matted fur, revealing the raw wound, a jagged tear, possibly inflicted during a clash with a predator or by a sharp claw in a scuffle during their harsh surroundings. The faint metallic scent of blood mingled with the cold, crisp air, intensifying his sense of urgency and need to act swiftly. Suddenly, a sharper gust of wind swept violently across the rugged ridge, carrying with it a distant haunting howling that seemed to echo ominously from the shadows lurking beyond. The sound was faint yet piercing, serving as a stark reminder that the wild wilderness was teeming with unseen lurking threats. Derek froze in place, instinctively clutching the trembling pup even more tightly to his chest. The wind's mournful cry repeated itself, becoming more urgent and insistent, sending a chilling shiver down his spine. The eerie howling appeared to be calling out to something, perhaps a dangerous predator, or a pack of wolves hidden in the darkness of the night. He cast a cautious, wary glance around, meticulously scanning the bleak, desolate landscape for any signs of movement, threat, or danger. The trail ahead remained eerily silent, yet the distant howling persisted, now joined by softer, spectral echoes that fluttered on the restless wind. This environment was filled with unseen perils lurking in the shadows, and his mind instinctively raced with doubts and questions. Should he risk returning to the station with the fragile, vulnerable creature, thereby exposing both himself and the pup to the lurking dangers outside? Or should he leave it here, trusting that nature's own course would take its due? A flicker of unlikely resolve ignited deep within him, strengthening his decision. He simply couldn't leave the helpless puppy behind, not after witnessing how vulnerable and defenseless it appeared. The fierce storm raging outside was growing worse with every minute, making finding shelter absolutely essential for both their safety. With great care, he gently adjusted his grip, carefully supporting the trembling, fragile body pressed against his chest. His thick coat offered some warmth, yet he knew it would provide very little real protection from the biting icy cold if he stayed out much longer. Still, a deepening sense of responsibility overwhelmed him. This tiny life now depended entirely on his kindness and action. As he slowly turned to make his way back toward the station, the distant howling of the wind and animals grew louder, more urgent and piercing. The wind carried that mournful sound across the frozen barren expanse like a heartbreaking chorus that seemed to resonate deep within his soul. Each step felt increasingly heavy, weighed down not only by the pup's delicate form, but also by the growing doubts and uncertainties clouding his mind. Was he risking everything by bringing this injured creature inside their safe haven? Could he truly save it in time, or was this act of compassion a reckless, dangerous mistake driven by emotion? He pushed onward steadily, his eyes peering intently at the faint, distant outline of the station, emerging through the swirling, relentless snowstorm. The land was perilous, the snow lay soft and unstable beneath his heavy boots, threatening to give way and swallow him whole with every step. The persistent howling behind him grew louder, serving as a chilling reminder that he was no longer alone in this frozen, unforgiving wilderness. Inside the station, the dull glow from within the fragile interior offered a fragile yet vital warmth, a comforting sanctuary from the merciless cold that enveloped everything outside. Derek moved cautiously and deliberately, carefully holding the injured pup close against his chest to keep it warm and protected. His mind roiled with conflicting emotions, deep-seated fear of what dangers might be lurking just beyond, genuine concern for the creature's fragile life, and a faint glimmer of hope that despite the darkness surrounding them, some light of salvation still remained. He understood well that the night was far from over, and the decisions he made at this critical moment could change everything forever. Gently, he lowered the trembling pup onto the cold, rough floor, feeling its fragile body pressing against the hard surface for comfort. As he inhaled a steadying breath, the distant howling gradually diminished into a haunting, almost lullaby-like silence. The storm's thunderous roars still echoed within his mind, mirroring the turmoil raging inside him: uncertainty, compassion, and a flickering sense of determination to persevere against all odds. This act of compassion profoundly changed his perspective. He was no longer simply an observer of the wilderness's harsh cruelty, but now a compassionate participant in its delicate and intricate balance. Gazing down at the wounded creature, he became acutely aware that his understanding had broadened. He recognized the lurking dangers outside, yet also saw the potential for hope and renewal. The survival of the pup now rested entirely on his actions, and in this critical moment, he realized that his decision to help had forged a new essential bond, one that could potentially alter both his own destiny and the broader course of his mission. He gently knelt beside the injured pup, carefully wrapping his coat snugly around it to provide warmth and comfort. The howling wind outside persisted, but it now sounded less like a menacing threat and more like a distant call, a haunting echo of the wilderness's unyielding, indifferent voice. Derek's grip on the creature tightened. His mind resolute and clear, he would protect it fiercely, no matter what challenges awaited. The darkness still threatened from the outside, yet within his heart, a faint but powerful spark of purpose ignited, illuminating a way forward through the biting icy night. The faint flickering glow of the small oil lamp cast uneven, dancing shadows across the cramped, weathered room, its gentle light flickering softly against the rough wooden walls, scarred and cracked with age. Outside, the mournful whisper of the wind pierced the night air, howling through the gaps and rattling the windows, but inside a fragile silence persisted, broken only by the soft whimpering sounds from the corner where Derek sat hunched over the injured pup. His rough, trembling hands meticulously wiped away the blood-streaked fur, striving to steady himself as much as possible as he carefully tended to the tiny creature beneath his fingertips. The young pup was only a few months old, covered in a patchy, matted fur with a deep bleeding gash on its side that oozed crimson onto its snowy white coat. Derek's brow furrowed deeply as he carefully examined the injury, searching intently for any object or cloth that could help him stem the relentless flow of blood. His supplies were very limited: just a piece of torn cloth, a rusty needle with rough edges, and a battered tin of antiseptic that had long lost its effectiveness. There was no proper medical kit here, only scattered remnants scavenged from the abandoned dilapidated station. Suddenly, a gust of wind rattled the door latch violently, causing him to flinch slightly, but he quickly forced himself to concentrate on the crucial task at hand. Gently, he pressed the cloth against the wound, applying just enough pressure to slow the bleeding while trying to keep calm. The pup whimpered softly again, trembling in his arms, its half-lit eyes still showing signs of awareness despite its pain. Derek's jaw clenched tightly. He understood, couldn't leave the tiny creature exposed to the freezing cold and the raging storm outside the shelter. Not when the howling wind threatened to tear apart the fragile structure they were trapped inside. He reached carefully for the antiseptic, pouring a modest amount onto the cloth, then gently dabbed at the deep gash with cautious, deliberate movements. The sharp, pungent aroma of burnt oil, combined with the bitter smell of antiseptic, filled the confined, cluttered space, mingling with the dampness that clung persistently to the cold walls and uneven floor. The pup's trembling gradually subsided, and its breathing became slightly steadier, offering a glimmer of relief. Derek silently bowed his head, whispering a quiet prayer for its survival as the heavy weight of responsibility pressed down heavily on his shoulders. The creature was extremely vulnerable, delicate, nothing like the fierce predator he had once imagined it might become. Still, in that critical moment, offering aid and comfort was all he could manage. As his hands worked carefully, his thoughts drifted to the outside world, the shifting, restless shadows cast by the storm, the distant cracking sounds echoing eerily through the icy wilderness, and the relentless, piercing howl of the wind. No rescue was forthcoming, the storm's relentless fury had sealed him in, and the darkness beyond the station was closing in with oppressive force. His solitude felt suffocating, pressing in on him like the icy, unyielding walls that surrounded the station. He was painfully aware that leaving the pup outside was utterly unthinkable, yet hiding it inside risked exposing both of them to danger. The fragile makeshift shelter could not withstand the fury of the storm forever, and if anyone were to discover the creature inside, it could spell great danger, possibly even death. He glanced nervously around the small, cramped room, carefully weighing his options and contemplating his next move. The decision soon became clear in his mind. He would conceal the pup, keep it hidden away from prying eyes until he could find a safer, more secure place or a reliable way to escape. Revealing its existence now would be reckless, an open invitation for serious trouble. He gently wrapped a rough, yet thoroughly clean piece of cloth around the tiny creature, tucking it in as carefully as possible. The pup's delicate amber eyes fluttered open briefly, piercing through the darkness and gloom, a faint flicker of resilience shining through them. Derek hesitated for a moment, then softly brushed his fingers along the damp, soft fur. The small body twitched faintly, a clear sign of life and stubborn determination. For a brief moment, a strange warmth stirred within him, perhaps hope that the little creature might somehow survive against the odds. But as quickly as that feeling arose, reality reasserted itself, reminding him of the perilous situation he faced. He could not keep the puppy hidden forever. The station's doors, fragile as they were, might not withstand the storm's relentless fury or the prying curiosity of strangers passing by. Someone could arrive unexpectedly, or the weather might worsen suddenly, revealing his hidden secret. His gaze shifted nervously to the small wrapped form, and he felt the heavy weight of difficult choices pressing down on him. The risks of being discovered loomed large in his mind, yet abandoning the puppy outside in the cold and stormy night was simply unthinkable. The storm raging outside was relentless, with howling winds and icy torrents, and the cold seeped deep into his bones. Yet, inside this tiny, cramped refuge, a fragile thread of resolve was steadily forming. He made up his mind to keep the creature concealed, at least for now, despite the dangers. As night deepened, the wind's mournful shriek rose and fell, echoing like a somber song in the darkness. Derek settled backward, his eyes locked onto the puppy. feeling an odd growing sense of connection and responsibility stirring within him under the dim glow of the flickering lamp. For the first time in days, a faint spark of purpose ignited inside him, burning brighter than the fears and doubts that had clouded his thoughts before. He understood well that this secret could not stay hidden forever, but for the moment it was enough for him to keep it safe and protected from the outside world. Exhaustion seeped deeply into his limbs, and he allowed himself a brief but precious moment of rest and recovery. Watching the tiny chest gently rise and fall with each shallow breath, he experienced a strange flickering sense of hope, like a small ember still glowing in the overwhelming darkness around him. Outside, the relentless storm continued to rage fiercely, indifferent to human struggles and suffering, but inside, a delicate thread of determination had been quietly spun. It might withstand the biting cold and chaos for a little while longer, providing a fragile glimmer of resilience. Suddenly, he detected a faint sound emanating from outside, perhaps the muffled scrape of footsteps or a subtle shift of snow, immediately making him tense with alertness. His eyes sharply darted toward the door, his heart pounding loudly in his chest. Was it a visitor, or had the storm finally broken enough to expose his hiding spot? He stiffened, listening with utmost concentration, but the noise eventually faded into the loud wail of the wind. He exhaled slowly and deeply, realizing that it was merely the storm's cruel and relentless symphony echoes. He reached carefully into his pocket and retrieved a small battered wooden piece, gently placing it behind the door latch to reinforce and secure it better. The fierce storm outside still threatened to burst through their fragile shelter, but he refused to give up hope. He had made a sworn decision to hide silently, to protect what little he had left, and to face whatever obstacles or dangers awaited him next. As the long, dark night stretched on, Derek's gaze stayed fixed on the pup, whose faint heartbeat and soft rhythmic breathing provided a quiet, comforting reassurance amidst the chaos. The storm's relentless fury outside continued to rage, yet inside this tiny, cramped room, a new quiet determination had taken root in his heart. He understood that his knowledge of the creature's existence was a precious secret that could alter everything, either saving his life or sealing his fate forever. For now, he vowed to guard and keep it hidden, and with that decision, a new chapter in his lonely, difficult struggle began. By dawn, the storm's furious roar would begin to weaken, diminishing the darkness and the fragile hope that had blossomed deep within him. Derek's situation had dramatically shifted. He was no longer simply a survivor sheltering from the cold wind and relentless storm. He now harbored a secret that could forge powerful new alliances or, conversely, ignite fierce new enemies. The stakes had significantly increased, and the dangerous journey that lay ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty, yet he was no longer entirely alone in this daunting situation. As the first faint light of dawn struggled to break through, it fought against a dense and swirling curtain of relentless snow and fierce wind, with the tempest outside having grown even more brutal overnight. The surrounding landscape was a chaotic, ever-changing maze of white fury, blinding in its intensity and utterly unyielding. Through the station's windows, countless ice crystals pressed stubbornly against the glass-like frozen fingers, trying, futilely, to invade from the cold outside as powerful gusts hammered the structure from every direction. Visibility had been reduced to just a few yards, transforming the world beyond into an indistinct and hazy blur of gray and white, as if the storm itself aimed to erase all signs of life. Derek stood motionless, staring intently at the raging storm outside, his eyes fixed on the turbulent chaos. His breath fogged up the window pane as he pressed his palm to it, observing the snow swirling in dizzyingly unpredictable patterns that seemed almost alive. The biting cold had penetrated through his worn coat, seeping into his skin, yet his focus remained resolute and unwavering. This was no ordinary winter storm. The way it had arrived so suddenly, unleashing destructive chaos overnight, hinted at something unnatural, perhaps an external force beyond simple weather phenomena. His fingers tapped faintly against the glass, seeking some semblance of reassurance amidst the swirling darkness outside, trying to grasp the strange situation he faced. Suddenly, a fierce and powerful gust of wind violently rattled the entire building, causing the overhead lights to flicker rapidly and the walls to shudder intensely under the force. The station's radio emitted a sharp burst of static interference before falling completely silent, leaving only an eerie quiet. Derek clenched his jaw tightly, understanding immediately that the communication line was now irrevocably dead. No voice, no signals, only the howling wind's relentless scream and the relentless snowfall battering the windows. His mind began racing, contemplating various possibilities. Would the storm continue raging for days on end? Could rescue teams arrive in time before their remaining supplies were entirely exhausted? These pressing questions gnawed at him, filling the tense silence with a growing sense of unease and dread. Suddenly, a faint crackling sound emerged from the station's speakers, weak, trembling, and almost unstable. Derek's heart leapt with hope as he recognized Elena's voice, strained but unmistakably clear. "Derek, do you copy? Please respond. The storm is intensifying rapidly. Visibility has dropped almost to zero, making it nearly impossible to see anything around us. We are completely cut off from the outside world here, with no way to communicate or receive assistance. You must prepare yourself immediately, stay indoors, bundle up to stay warm, and keep a close eye on your surroundings. If this relentless weather continues like this, we could be trapped inside for an extended period, possibly several days." Her words sent a cold shiver down his spine, the weight of her message hitting him. Elena's tone remained surprisingly calm, yet beneath her composed exterior, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of anxiety that made his stomach clench with worry. She was attempting to sound reassuring to keep morale up, but her voice revealed her deep concern and unease. The feeling of the station's complete isolation became more tangible and oppressive than it had ever been before, adding to the growing sense of vulnerability in this brutal storm. There is no possibility to send help right now, and no way to alert anyone else if something more sinister, lurking beyond the storm's relentless fury, was waiting to strike. His eyes flicked once more to the snow-covered window, vividly imagining the raging, swirling landscape outside as a merciless, gaping maw, ready to swallow everything whole in an instant. He slowly moved toward the door, his heavy boots making soft, echoing crunches on the icy, treacherous floor beneath him. The storm's deafening roar increased in volume as he grasped the cold metal handle, pausing briefly to gather his courage. The wind scream seemed to cut through his mind like a sharp blade, pressing relentlessly against every nerve and fiber in his body. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he cautiously pushed the door open just a crack, peering into the blinding, swirling blizzard outside. The world was a chaotic, tumultuous whirl of white and gray, with shifting shapes and shadows that moved unpredictably within the storm's overwhelming grip. Snow whipped past him in vicious, stinging gusts, obliterating any sense of distance, direction, or stability. Inside the shelter, he hurried to secure the door as quickly as possible, shoving furniture against it and layering multiple blankets over the gaps, desperately trying to block out the raging tempest. The interior was shrouded in deep shadows, with only the faint glow of a battered, flickering lantern casting sporadic, wavering shapes across the rough, weathered walls. The fierce wind's relentless fury seeped through the tiniest cracks and crevices, intensifying the coldness and making the entire space feel even more oppressive and unwelcoming. Derek carefully moved toward the central table, firmly clutching the fragile lantern and its flickering flame, which cast elongated, uncertain shadows that danced across the room's surfaces. The surrounding silence was heavy and oppressive, akin to being trapped inside a tomb as the violent storm's relentless violence pressed inward on every side. He wrapped himself as tightly as possible in a thick, coarse blanket, clutching it tightly to his chest as if to shield himself from the unseen dangers. His trembling hands were not only a response to the piercing cold, but also a result of the growing anxiety weighing heavily on his mind. A faint flicker of hope shimmered within him. Elena's warning might be the last bit of contact he would have for an uncertain period. However, beneath that fragile hope lurked a darker, more ominous fear, the possibility that the storm could persist for days, or even worse, that some unknown menace might be lurking just beyond the chaos, waiting silently for the perfect moment to strike when least expected. Suddenly, an ear-splitting crack erupted throughout the building, sharp and unnatural amid the storm's howling gusts. His heart leaped into his throat as he instinctively froze, alert and breathless. Was it the wind violently snapping a sturdy beam, or was it something else entirely, something darker and more threatening? He carefully strained his ears, trying to identify and pinpoint the precise source of the unusual sound. Silence quickly returned, heavy, thick, and complete, as if the entire station was holding its breath in tense anticipation. The radio crackled once more, faint and heavily distorted, making it hard to discern any clear message. Derek leaned closer, desperate to catch any transmission or signal, but only static responded, akin to distant whispers lost amid the storm's deafening roar. The oppressive silence that followed felt even more disturbing and intimidating than the earlier noise. The raging fury outside persisted unwavering, relentless in its violence and unyielding in its fury. He glanced at the clock, though. In this chaos, the concept of time seemed utterly meaningless and irrelevant. Minutes stretched endlessly, then hours, with no clear end in sight. Outside, the relentless snow continued piling up against the station's walls, threatening to completely bury it beneath a thick icy blanket. Inside, the biting cold seeped deeply into his bones, making each breath shallow, rapid, and labored. He clenched his fists tightly, struggling to contain the rising tide of panic within him. A sudden fierce gust of wind tore through a loose patch of the roof, producing a sharp, piercing whistle before fading into a haunting, continuous drone. The entire structure groaned loudly under this assault, with the walls trembling as though they might quite literally give way at any moment. Derek's eyes darted anxiously from side to side, searching desperately for signs of damage or any hidden weakness, threatening to compromise the station's integrity. Every creaking sound felt like a sinister threat, and each gust of wind was an oppressive assault on his fragile resolve. He contemplated the idea of reinforcing the walls, but realized that the storm's immense power was completely beyond his ability to control or influence. His thoughts quickly intensified, racing to come up with a way to effectively endure the relentless onslaught. Suddenly, a distant, hauntingly eerie cracking sound echoed ominously throughout the entire building, a slow, calculated noise that starkly contrasted the chaotic roar of the storm outside. His stomach clenched with unease. Was the station itself shifting under the immense pressure, or was there something else, perhaps an unseen force, causing the structure to strain and moan? He stood completely still, listening with heightened senses. An oppressive silence fell again, thick and almost suffocating, as if the very building was holding its breath in anticipation. The radio sputtered once more, faint and broken, struggling to transmit. Derek pressed his ear tightly against the receiver, trying desperately to catch any message, any sign of life beyond the static and interference. Only white noise responded in return, ghostly whispers of distant voices lost deep within the raging storm. The silence that followed was deafeningly oppressive, weighing heavy and pressing down on him with relentless force. He glanced at the clock, though it now seemed utterly meaningless. Minutes, hours, the storm's relentless grip appeared to stretch into eternity. Outside, the snow kept falling heavily, piling up and threatening to bury everything entirely beneath a thick, endless white blanket. Inside, the cold seeped mercilessly into his bones, each breath shallow, rapid, and strained. Suddenly, a loud tearing sound shattered the stillness. A section of the roof was violently ripped open by the fierce wind, sending a rush of icy air crashing into the room with a chilling roar. Derek instinctively stepped back swiftly, his eyes wide with alarm as the biting cold poured into the space around him. He grasped a thick, coarse cloth, pressing it firmly against the jagged opening in an effort to block the fierce wind that howled outside. The raging storm seemed almost alive, resembling a savage beast feeding greedily on the station's delicate stability and structure. His eyes shifted to the flickering lantern nearby. The delicate flame emitted flickering shadows that flicked and danced across the cold, damp walls, yet it was barely sufficient to push back the overwhelming darkness that enveloped the space. A strong wave of helplessness and despair suddenly swept over him regardless of how thoroughly he had prepared. The storm's formidable force remained beyond his control. His fists clenched even tighter, a vain attempt to fight off the rising surge of panic and fear. Then, faintly, he caught a subtle, unnatural cracking sound like the low, ominous creak of the building straining under immense pressure. His heart pounded loudly in his chest. Was it the entire structure starting to give way? Or was it something even more unsettling and unknown? He strained intensely to listen, but the distant sound gradually faded away, replaced by an overwhelming, oppressive silence that seemed to envelop everything. The radio sputtered once more, emitting a burst of static that filled the entire room with a deafening crackle. Derek leaned in closer, his desperation growing with each passing second, desperately trying to catch any sign of a clear signal. However, all he managed to hear was a faint, ghostly whisper of broken partial signals struggling to come through. Outside, the fierce storm continued to rage, unabated, thunderous, and unrelenting, making it impossible to hear anything clearly. He glanced again at the clock, uncertain whether minutes or hours had passed. Here, time had become completely meaningless and irrelevant. Outside the window, snow kept piling up relentlessly, threatening to bury and crush the isolated station completely under its weight. Inside, the biting cold seeped deeply into his bones, making each breath an arduous effort. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind tore through a loose corner of the roof, producing a piercing whistle that then settled into a haunting, continuous drone. Derek's jaw clenched more tightly, his muscles tense with frustration and fear. This was no ordinary storm. It was a merciless, relentless force designed to test every fiber of the station and himself. His mind sharpened, zeroing in on a singular, unwavering goal: survival. To endure until help arrived or the storm finally subsided, regardless of how long that might take. As the howling wind persisted outside, he realized that the station was more than mere shelter. It was a delicate, fragile fortress against the unknown dangers lurking beyond. Amid the chaos of the whiteout, his resolve stood as the only barrier between him and complete destruction. The outside world was engulfed in chaos and turmoil, yet here, within these battered walls, a fragile glimmer of hope refused to die. The storm showed no signs of weakening, but Derek instinctively sensed that this was only the very beginning of everything. The genuine challenge was still ahead, something darker, more sinister, lurking just beyond the storm's relentless fury. He clenched his grip more tightly on the lantern, preparing himself mentally for whatever force or obstacle awaited him next, fully aware that his survival depended not only on sheer endurance, but also on unwavering mental resolve. The White Tempest was merely the opening act. The true ordeal was still on the horizon. The howling wind battered the station with unyielding force, a constant piercing shriek that seemed to seep through every tiny crack, carrying icy gusts that sliced straight to the bone. Inside, the dimly lit room felt unbearably suffocating, shadows flickering unpredictably across battered and scarred walls as the storm outside grew even more intense. The dying generator's flickering light cast brief, erratic flashes of illumination, plunging Derek into moments of utter darkness, before sporadic sparks of light revealed the chaos and disarray within the small outpost. He moved swiftly, his breath fogging in the frigid air as he approached the control panel with urgency. His fingers trembled not just from overwhelming fatigue, but also from the gnawing dread that had taken root over the past hours, pressing heavily on his conscience. The hum of the generator sputtered weakly, then faltered entirely, finally dying with a sharp metallic click. Complete darkness engulfed the room, broken only by the faint glow of the lantern he managed to keep steadily burning, its flickering flame casting eerie, unsettling shadows across the battered walls. Derek pressed his palms firmly against the cold, unyielding metal surface of the console, listening intently to the oppressive silence that filled the empty station. The power was completely out. Without electricity, the entire facility felt even more fragile and vulnerable, exposed to the relentless biting cold that seeped through the thick walls like an invisible predator hungry for warmth. His eyes flicked to the nearby windows, where fierce snowstorms whipped through the air in relentless, chaotic gusts, blurring any possibility of seeing beyond the thick glass. Outside, dark, twisted shadows seemed to dance across the snow-covered landscape, distorted shapes, flickering and shifting wildly with the fury of the wind. A cold shiver ran down his spine, but he compelled himself to concentrate. The survival of the station depended on restoring some form of power, even if only a faint flicker of hope. His gaze fixed on the battered backup batteries and uncertain fragile reserve, that might give enough energy to power the essential systems, just for a little while longer. He reached out nervously for the switch, his fingers fumbling anxiously in the darkness, but the system remained unresponsive and silent. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, and he exhaled slowly, feeling the numbing cold seeping into his bones, making him acutely aware of his fatigue. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest, trying desperately to generate some lingering warmth, but all his efforts proved futile. The storm's relentless fury was completely uncontrollable, and now the station's last remaining lifeline had utterly failed. The overwhelming silence was deafening, broken only by the distant ominous cracking of thick ice and the mournful chilling howl of the wind. He looked around frantically, desperately searching for anything that could possibly offer him aid or hope. A battered, dust-covered radio sat silent on a shelf, its wires twisted, frayed, and rendered useless after years of disuse and neglect. The faint hope of receiving a distress signal or a rescue attempt had been completely shattered. The oppressive silence closed in on him, heavy and absolute, interrupted only by the distant ice cracking, and the winds banshee-like wails creeping through the darkness. Was anyone out there? Could anyone hear his silent plea buried deep beneath the storm's brutal fury? His mind raced wildly with waves of doubt and despair. The station was completely isolated, completely surrounded by a vast, relentless blanket of snow and thick ice. No other human figures had been seen or heard from in several days, leaving a haunting silence in its wake. Stepping outside into the freezing wilderness was an incredibly daunting and terrifying prospect, yet, deep inside, he couldn't help but wonder if it was the only chance he had to find any kind of salvation or escape from this frozen nightmare. Somewhere beyond the swirling white chaos and swirling snowdrifts, perhaps someone was bravely fighting to reach him and offer help. Or maybe there was no one at all. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind slammed forcefully into the sturdy walls, causing the windows to rattle violently and ominously. Shadows stretched and lengthened across the frost-covered glass panes, moving in unnatural choppy patterns under the weak half-light. The darkness closed in relentlessly, becoming thick and almost suffocating, filling every dark corner of the room and threatening to overwhelm him. Derek's trembling hand tightened its grip on a rusty old wrench he kept close by, not out of hope, but purely from instinct and necessity. He hesitated for a moment, his ears strained and alert for any faint sound beyond the deafening storm's roar, uncertain if help was near or if danger lurked just outside. Was that a faint, almost imperceptible crack, or merely the wind's subtle whisper? The sound was vague and indistinct, seamlessly merging into the overwhelming cacophony of noises outside. His mind briefly wandered to the distant other station, located many miles away, now completely unreachable and cut off from any contact. There was no way to communicate, no sign of rescue, only the relentless, brutal winter landscape and shadows lurking ominously beyond the fragile glass. He weighed the possibility of risking braving the storm in an attempt to seek help, but the idea seemed dangerously reckless and foolhardy. The Tempest was a living, breathing beast, wild, unpredictable, and potentially lethal, and he was ill-equipped physically and mentally to face such a ferocious ordeal. The mere thought of stepping outside into the swirling, biting snow, crawling through the freezing cold in search of a signal or a possible escape route, made his stomach churn with anxiety. Every instinct within him urged him to stay exactly where he was, safe and still. His gaze slowly drifted back to the flickering lantern, its fragile flame struggling desperately against the overwhelming darkness that threatened to swallow everything. The dim, flickering light cast wavering, ephemeral shadows that made the room seem eerily alive, with silent, watchful figures lurking nearby. The relentless flicker persisted without pause, constantly threatening to extinguish the fragile glow that struggled to hold on at any given moment. He understood that he couldn't remain within this oppressive darkness forever, but the very thought of stepping out into the chaos and turmoil outside filled him with profound dread and uncertainty. He closed his eyes briefly to gather his thoughts, the cold air and overwhelming fatigue pressing heavily on his mind and body. The wind's howling, which had been fierce just moments ago, softened slightly, offering a rare and fleeting moment of deceptive calm. Was this quiet before an even worse storm, or a sign that the fierce tempest was beginning to die down? He dared not allow himself to hope too loudly, knowing full well how delicate and fragile such thoughts were in this treacherous place. Then, almost imperceptibly, the roaring wind's intensity diminished further. The violent shriek and rage of the storm subsided into a low, mournful moan that echoed faintly in the silence. A strange, almost tangible stillness suddenly settled in, resembling the calm that follows a fierce, unrelenting battle. Shadows continued flickering unpredictably at the edges of his peripheral vision, but the oppressive grip of the storm was gradually loosening, if only by a small margin. Could this moment be a critical sign of change? Or was it simply a fleeting respite before chaos could surge back with even greater force? His heart pounded more rapidly, and a cautious spark of hope flickered inside him, challenging his fears. The storm's retreat might indicate that help was now closer than he had dared to believe, or perhaps it was merely the calm before an even larger, more destructive fury. Either way, this brief pause presented a narrow window of possibility and potential. He tightened his fists, feeling the icy coldness of the air bite into his skin, yet a faint ember of determination and resolve ignited anew within him. He understood, couldn't afford to remain paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. If there was any chance, no matter how slim or fragile, it was essential to act promptly and decisively now. Perhaps the shadows outside had become less menacing now, or maybe they were simply awaiting the storm's complete passing before revealing more. He cast a cautious glance toward the door, carefully weighing whether to risk taking another uncertain step into the unknown, or to remain concealed until the raging tempest subsided entirely. The air grew noticeably colder, and the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The lantern's flame flickered briefly, but remained steady, casting a soft, unwavering glow that seemed to push back the encroaching darkness. Inside, Derek felt the heavy burden of solitude pressing down on him more than ever before. Yet amidst the bleakness, a faint but persistent thought began to take root. Maybe help was still out there, hidden behind the thick snow and lurking shadows, waiting patiently for him to discover it, if only he dared to look. As the last gust of wind finally died away, a quiet sense of clarity settled within him. He realized that shadows were no longer merely threats, they could be signs of movement, hints of life beyond the storm's fury. The key question now was, would he summon enough courage to face the icy, uncertain unknown once more, or give in to despair? He inhaled deeply, feeling the sharp cold fill his lungs, and steadied his trembling body. Outside, the world remained shrouded in darkness, but the storm's fury was gradually diminishing. A new significant choice suddenly appeared before him, one that could potentially change everything in profound ways. The flickering lantern cast a faint, trembling glow on his face, serving as a fragile symbol of hope amidst the growing darkness of the night. Suddenly, a subtle shift in the wind's pattern drew his attention, making him alert. The storm's distant roar, though somewhat subdued and muffled, hinted at something unpredictable and dangerous, lurking just beyond his immediate sight, an unseen force that might bring either salvation or utter catastrophe. His eyes narrowed as he listened intently, realizing that the storm's gradual weakening was not necessarily a sign of peace, but rather a prelude to something more threatening and ominous. Carefully, he moved toward the door, gripping the handle tightly with anticipation. The shadows outside appeared to pulse and flicker, as if waiting for his next move. He hesitated briefly, then took a slow, steady breath, mentally preparing himself for whatever lay ahead. Whether to step boldly into the snow or remain silent in cautious silence, he understood that his next action could change everything forever, either leading to salvation or sealing his fate and doom. The cold, biting air pressed against his face as he slowly pushed the door open just slightly, the wind's icy fingers brushing past him, adding to the tense atmosphere. The storm's decreasing howling created a fragile, almost fragile window of opportunity. With unwavering determination and every ounce of courage he could summon, Derek stepped cautiously outside, prepared to confront the darkness that awaited him, fully aware that these shadows might be more than mere threats, and that the storm's true and unpredictable nature was only just beginning to reveal itself in this quiet dawn. Morning arrived with a muted, subdued glow, casting a pale and cold light across the vast frozen landscape. The relentless storm had finally eased, leaving behind an unsettling silence broken only by the faint crackle of shifting ice and the distant lonely cry of a solitary bird. Derek stood silently at the edge of the station, muscles tense and stiff from the night's exhausting struggle, eyes fixated on the bleak distant horizon. Although the wind had died down, a sharp, penetrating chill persisted, seeping through his coat and prickling his skin like icy needles piercing him. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the frigid air sharpening his alertness and senses to their highest point. His gaze wandered over the snowdrifts, which had been drastically reshaped overnight by the storm's violent fury. The smooth surface had been transformed into a patchwork quilt of upheaved layers, with towering drifts pressed tightly against the station walls. Yet, amid this apparent chaos, his sharp eyes noticed something unusual, a strange pattern in the snow that hadn't been there the evening before, hinting at a mysterious presence or recent activity. At first, he dismissed it as a mere trick of light or a random natural sculpting made by the wind. However, as he squinted more intently, the intricate details gradually became clearer and more defined. Large, irregular footprints pressed deeply into the compacted snow, leading away from the station and stretching out toward the frozen icy surface of the lake. The footprints were unmistakably paw-shaped broad, with pronounced indentations that strongly suggested a creature of considerable size had recently passed through this area. A spark of curiosity ignited within him, though it was carefully tempered by a cautious sense of awareness. The trail appeared fresh, likely only a few hours old, and the tracks displayed signs of hurried movement, uneven strides, that indicated the creature might have been fleeing from something or chasing after prey. Derek crouched down cautiously, brushing aside a thin layer of snow to examine the prints more meticulously. The edges of the impressions were sharp and pristine, not melted or weathered, confirming their recent origin. His mind rapidly raced with a series of questions: what kind of animal could possibly leave such distinct large tracks in the snow? Was it a predator, or perhaps a resilient survivor who had endured the storm? The thought of a living creature out here, amidst the bleak desolation, ignited a cautious flicker of hope within him. The faint trail extended before him, beckoning him forward with silent promises, answers, or at least some sign of life amid the vast icy wasteland. His fingers instinctively moved into his coat pocket, clutching the worn talisman, a small keepsake from a distant memory, a silent prayer for safety and luck. He paused for a moment, carefully weighing the potential risks of following the trail against the possibility of discovering something meaningful. Outside, the frozen landscape remained eerily silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation. The footprints seemed to call him onward, whispering subtle promises of revelation and discovery. A faint hope grew stronger. Perhaps this was a sign that something had survived the storm, that something was still alive and worth seeking out in this frozen wilderness. His gaze shifted back to the trail, then lowered to the icy surface of the lake. The footprints led directly toward the frozen water, a dark trail etched across the bright white expanse of ice, drawing him closer to the unknown. Cautiously, he took another careful step forward, then another, each movement carefully measured and deliberate. The snow beneath his sturdy boots crunched softly with every step, a subtle sound quickly absorbed by the expansive, oppressive silence surrounding him. As he continued to advance, the trail became more clearly visible, revealing the uneven gait and distinctive footprints of the creature that had previously passed through this icy expanse. The lake's surface stretched out majestically before him, a vast mirror-like sheet of smooth ice, reflecting the bleak overcast sky above. Once a formidable barrier against the storm, it now appeared fragile and delicate under the weight of the cold. The footprints approached the shoreline, then gradually dissipated into a series of irregular markings that crisscrossed and intersected across the frozen surface. Derek slowed his pace, carefully studying the disturbed pattern in the snow and ice. The creature had paused here, maybe sensing something unusual or simply taking a moment to rest. Faint dragging marks traced out some signs of injury or exhaustion, hinting at its recent struggle. He cautiously stepped closer, meticulously scanning the ice below for any signs of movement beneath the icy surface. The sharp crackling sounds of shifting ice echoed forebodingly through the silent icy landscape. His mind was racing. What kind of creature could have left such distinct marks in the snow? Was it a predator hunting prey, or perhaps a wounded animal trying to escape? The numerous questions nagged at him, but he forced himself to dismiss them momentarily, concentrating instead on the path that lay ahead. The footprints persisted, leading progressively toward the center of the frozen lake, then suddenly veered towards a dark, shadowy patch near the middle area where the snow had been disturbed, exposing a narrow crack in the fragile ice. He paused once more, a fleeting surge of caution passing through him as he assessed the risk. The ice appeared sturdy, seemingly solid, but beneath the surface, the dark waters stretched unfathomably deep. He clenched his fists tightly, feeling the burden of his own doubts weighing heavily on him, yet a faint glimmer of hope remained. Perhaps this trail would lead him to something alive, an elusive source that could illuminate the strange cold and shadows he had glimpsed earlier. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he carefully tested the ice with tentative steps. The surface beneath his feet was slick and uneven, with patches of cracked ice and snow muffling the sound of his movements, adding to the eerie quiet of the frozen wilderness. As he approached closer to the heart of the area, the footprints became increasingly scattered and irregular, as if the creature had momentarily paused or altered its path. Near a dark, shadowy patch of snow, he observed a small mound of disturbed ice and snow, and beneath it, a faint glimmer, something shiny and reflective, partly concealed under the thick ice layer. His pulse quickened with a mix of curiosity and concern. Carefully, he knelt down, extending his trembling hands toward the ground, The biting cold pressed into his fingertips as he gently brushed away the snow and ice, uncovering a fragment of bone or perhaps a piece of frozen flesh from some creature. This find confirmed his suspicions there had been an injury here, possibly sustained by the creature itself. He scanned the surrounding icy landscape, searching for any signs of movement, life, or further evidence. The trail of footprints extended further into the distance, leading deeper into the vast unknown wilderness. His mind was racing. Could this be a sign of an injured survivor nearby, or perhaps a warning of a lurking danger concealed beneath the frozen surface? The footprints disappeared near the central area, yet the disturbed snow and the fragment beneath the ice strongly suggested recent activity or movement in this remote frozen environment. With a deep, steadying breath, Derek resolved to proceed. He would cautiously trace the path ahead, taking deliberate, careful steps, fueled by his hope of discovering something alive or uncovering crucial answers about the mysterious cold that had suddenly seeped into his entire world. Carefully, he placed his foot onto the icy surface, testing its firmness with each cautious movement. The ice was dangerous and unpredictable, glossy, slippery patches, thin layers of snow muffling his footsteps, and the faint, irregular cracks hinting at the fragility and instability beneath. As he advanced toward the center, his footprints became less frequent and more scattered, as if the creature had hesitated or altered its direction suddenly. Near a dark, shadowy patch, he noticed a small disturbance in area where snow had been displaced, revealing a narrow, delicate crack in the ice. His eyes fixated on it, his heart pounding in his chest with anticipation. Beneath the surface, the water was eerily dark, completely silent, and seemingly depths unmeasurable. He clenched his jaw tightly, sensing the mounting tension in his muscles and nerves. The fragment of bone or flesh beneath the icy barrier confirmed injury. Possibly the creature was wounded, struggling with its fight to survive in these harsh, unfamiliar conditions. His eyes moved quickly and carefully across the vast frozen landscape, diligently searching for any subtle movement, signs of life, or hidden life forms concealed beneath the icy surface. The trail extended far into the distance, stretching out endlessly and beckoning him to follow it further into the mysterious unknown. But this time, a newfound sense of resolve and determination took firm hold of him. He would not blindly chase after mere chateaus or illusions. Instead, he would consciously look for tangible signs of vitality beyond the icy surface, perhaps find a way to offer help or gain a deeper understanding of what mysterious entities or creatures lingered here. The sprawling landscape stretched endlessly before him, silent, immense, and brimming with countless secrets waiting to be uncovered. Every step he took was deliberate and purposeful, each breath carefully measured as he pressed on deeper into the icy wilderness, driven by the resolve to uncover the hidden truth. By the end of this arduous journey, Derek was no longer just a cautious observer lurking on the periphery. He had transformed into an active seeker, equipped with new knowledge. He sensed that an injured creature was nearby, concealed within the icy terrain, and the cold that haunted his world was more than just a harsh climate. It was a warning sign of something lurking beneath the surface, something alive, wounded, or perhaps trapped, patiently waiting for him to find it. The world around him had shifted dramatically, and so had he, no longer an outsider merely watching from afar, but now a direct participant in the unfolding, mysterious story that was gradually revealing itself. Derek suddenly hurriedly stepped back as the ice beneath his feet emitted a piercing, unsettling groan that echoed through the cold air. The faint, shimmering rays of sunlight reflected sharply and jaggedly off the frozen surface, casting complex fractured patterns across the snow-covered ground below. A strong metallic scent hung thickly in the air, slicing through the cold atmosphere with an unnatural, almost sinister edge, carried on the biting wind that seemed to whisper faint warnings through the numerous cracks and deep fissures of the fragile ice. His eyes flickered rapidly across the icy surface, carefully scanning for any signs of instability or weakness, every nerve in his body tense with suspicion. He moved with extreme caution, each step extremely deliberate, his ears finely attuned to the subtle responses and creaks from the ice beneath his weight. The oppressive silence was broken only by distant haunting creaks that resonated through the frozen landscape, as if the very ground itself was alive and protesting loudly. His gaze was fixed intently on a dark stained bloodstain splattered across the icy crust, starkly contrasting against the white surface, as if wounds on a pale frozen flesh. His breath formed quick misty clouds that mingled with the frigid air as he lowered himself into a crouch, narrowing his eyes to better scrutinize the trail. The blood appeared fresh, shimmering in the pale sunlight, yet the pattern was inconsistent, sporadic, irregular drips trailing outward as if spilled suddenly and in haste. He extended his hand cautiously, fingertips gently grazing the icy crust, but the smooth surface remained unnervingly flawless, showing no signs of melting, cracking, or any recent disturbance. The bloodstains indicated a sudden, violent injury, possibly resulting from a struggle, but the exact identity or nature of what or who caused it continued to be uncertain. A gust of wind suddenly gained strength, carrying a piercing metallic scent that sharply sliced through the cold air. This sharp aroma prickled at his skin, causing a tingling sensation and raising goosebumps along his arms. The distant groans and creaking noises of the ice grew louder and more ominous, creating an unsettling atmosphere that felt unpredictable. Every crack and pop of the ice seemed to serve as an ominous warning, as if the entire frozen expanse was testing its own stability and limits. Derek clenched his jaw tightly, narrowing his eyes in concentration as he carefully scanned the wide horizon, searching for any movement or signs of what might have caused the bloodshed. His gaze fixated on the faint trail of blood, which led toward a narrow fissure where the ice looked thinner, darker, and almost translucent under the sunlight. The crack appeared to beckon him silently, whispering of hidden depths and secrets lurking beneath the surface. Driven by a blend of curiosity and cautiousness, he slowly edged closer, each measured step taken with care, acutely aware of the increasing instability beneath his feet. Suddenly, a piercing echoing crack shattered the intense silence surrounding him. The sharp sound was unnervingly close, far too close, and his body instinctively tensed in reaction. The thin layer of ice beneath his feet quivered noticeably, a small fissure rapidly widening and revealing a jagged, menacing gap that threatened to swallow the entire trail. The ice groaned loudly again, protesting fiercely against this intrusion and the instability caused. His heart pounded relentlessly against his chest as he watched the fragile ice shimmer ominously near the expanding crack, its surface cracking further. He began to retreat slowly, every muscle tensed and coiled with caution, his eyes flickering anxiously between the growing fissure and the trail of bloodstains leading toward it. The surface was dangerously unstable, with the potential to give way at any moment and plunge him into unknown depths. Despite the danger, an undeniable sense of curiosity pushed him onward, compelling him to investigate further. The bloodstains and the crack appeared interconnected, two parts of a story desperately waiting to be uncovered and understood. His hand hovered hesitantly near his waist, wavering over the small knife tucked securely into his coat pocket, ready for any sudden threat. While it wouldn't provide much protection against the relentless ice, it still offered him a small sense of reassurance, a vital reminder of his unwavering resolve. The wind intensified, howling with greater ferocity, tearing at snowflakes and driving them forcefully into his face, causing his vision to become increasingly blurred and obscured. He blinked rapidly, trying desperately to clear the snow from his eyes, then focused intently on the fissure ahead. A subtle, almost imperceptible ripple caught his attention, an almost invisible disturbance passing through the ice near the crack, hinting at hidden activity beneath. His instincts screamed for caution, yet he understood that turning away now could mean missing a crucial clue, something important. The bloodstains, the crack, the metallic scent, these unmistakable signs pointed to activity happening beneath the frozen surface. Something that might explain the unnatural cold and the strange shifting shadows he had glimpsed earlier in the icy gloom. He took a deep, steadying breath, bracing himself against the biting wind, and stepped carefully toward the edge of the fissure. The thin, fragile ice looked just barely able to support his weight. With deliberate care and caution, he leaned forward slightly, peering into the dark, ominous depths below. The opening was narrow, but seemed to go deep underground, and a faint, flickering glow emanated from within, suggesting movement, perhaps a creature hiding there, or something entirely different and unknown lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a loud and thunderous crack shattered the tense, eerie silence, causing him to stumble back instinctively in surprise. The fissure widened abruptly and unpredictably, sending a cascade of shattered ice chunks tumbling into the dark abyss below. The terrifying sound echoed across the icy plain like an ominous warning, an unmistakable omen of the hidden peril lurking beneath the surface. His pulse quickened significantly as he watched the ice give way, a cold creeping dread seeping into his bones and mind. He stood at the very edge, breathing heavily and unevenly, with his eyes intensely fixed on the yawning, menacing gap before him. The bloodstains, the crack in the ice, the faint but unnatural glow, each detail, pointed to a mysterious presence beneath the frozen surface, something alive and potentially dangerous. The weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on him, yet he couldn't turn away or retreat. Something was stirring beneath the frozen veneer, leaving its ominous mark in blood and fractures. As the last shards of ice settled and scattered across the ground, he realized this discovery would forever change everything he believed. The surface was only a simple prelude. Beneath it lay a deeper, more complex enigma, waiting patiently to be uncovered. The blood-stained ice and the expanding crack in the frozen surface signaled loudly that the unknown was drawing much closer, something patient, lurking silently and unseen, yet ready to reveal its ancient secrets hidden deep beneath the icy layers. His gaze remained fixed on the fractured ice sheet, observing the faint, ghostly glow emanating from below, along with the ominous bloodstains that seemed to pulse with a threatening rhythmic heartbeat. He understood that danger was imminent and unavoidable, but turning back was no longer a viable option. Whatever ominous presence dwelled beneath the ice had already begun to alter him, reshaping his understanding, strengthening his resolve, and shifting his perception of the growing threat. The landscape's oppressive silence now felt even heavier, charged with the weighty anticipation of both discovery and peril. He took one final, deliberate breath to steady himself, then stepped forward again with unwavering determination, prepared to confront whatever secrets lay hidden beneath. The darkness within the fissure called out to him, promising answers but also threatening imminent danger. The icy surface, bloodstains, and mysterious glow had intertwined to create a new chapter in his journey, one that would push him further into the depths of the unknown, where shadows and ancient secrets patiently waited in the frozen abyss. Inside the station, a suffocating silence reigned, broken only by distant, irregular groans of shifting ice from outside. Derek sat tense and alert in his chair, his eyes fixed intently on the narrow slit of window glass, which fractured the stormy, chaotic landscape beyond, as if guarding the secrets of the frozen wasteland. Shadows flickered briefly at the very edge of his peripheral vision, wavering as if they were spectral figures attempting to pierce through the thick darkness surrounding him. His fingers clenched tightly around the cold, unforgiving metal of his rifle, causing his knuckles to blanch under the pressure, while every nerve in his body pulsed with heightened alertness and a sense of imminent danger. The relentless wind howled fiercely, battering the walls with deafening force, producing a shrill, piercing chorus that seemed to drown out any hope of normalcy, calm, or safety. Outside, the raging blizzard intensified once again, with snow spiraling erratically in violent, unpredictable gusts that blurred the distant horizon, reducing visibility to mere feet and creating an otherworldly chaotic landscape. The icy gust rattled the thin metal shutters with metallic shrieks and groans, threatening to tear them apart and expose whatever lurked hidden within the storm's turbulent chaos. A sudden shiver crept down Derek's spine, not from the relentless cold, which was persistent and biting, but from a deeper primal sense that he was being watched. He sensed unseen eyes hidden somewhere in the swirling white mass, patiently awaiting the perfect moment to strike. Steadying himself, he pressed his forehead against the cold glass, peering into the encroaching darkness, eyes darting nervously in every direction for any sign of movement. Shadows flickered again, faint fleeting shapes that seemed to pulse and shimmer at the very edge of his perception. He blinked rapidly, trying to dispel the illusion, but the strange sensation persisted, growing more persistent and commanding his attention with increasing insistence. His mind conjured vivid images of elusive figures slipping silently through the storm, slipping past the limits of light and sound, unseen by anyone but undeniably present in the darkness. A faint, almost ghostly scraping noise echoed eerily in his ears, barely audible over the relentless roar of the wind, yet it gnawed at his consciousness with an unnatural, insistent persistence. The unsettling sound returned softer now, like claws dragging lazily across the icy surface just beyond the station's perimeter, sending a shiver down his spine. His grip on the rifle involuntarily tightened as a reflex. He pressed his palm against the cold fog glass, narrowing his eyes in an effort to focus and discern any movement. Every nerve in his body was on high alert, every instinct finely tuned to detect the slightest anomaly or sign of danger. The station was completely isolated, cut off from any form of help, vulnerable in ways he had never fully grasped until this chilling moment. A shadow shifted swiftly at the very corner of his vision, causing him to freeze instantly, his heart pounding in a rhythm that felt both alien and strangely familiar. The flickering silhouette seemed to ripple or shimmer, almost like a mirage, yet the cold sweat forming on his forehead betrayed the stark reality of his mounting fears, and the presence of something unseen yet dangerously near. The fierce storm outside cloaked his line of sight completely, yet his mind vividly reconstructed intense images, a shadowy figure lurking stealthily behind towering snowdrifts, claws rhythmically scraping the icy surface, ominous eyes silently watching, patiently waiting. He hesitated for only a brief moment before slowly rising from his seat with calculated movements. Every step he took was deliberate, carefully planned, and cautious to avoid making any noise. His sturdy boots produced soft, muffled sounds on the cold wooden floor as he carefully approached the door, rifle firmly aimed and ready in his grasp. The handle was cold and unyielding under his fingers, almost frozen from the chill outside. He inhaled deeply, attempting to steady his trembling hands, and then slowly turned the latch with a gentle, deliberate motion. The door swung open with a faint creaking groan, revealing a narrow slit of swirling snow and darkness beyond the threshold. The freezing blast hit him sharply, like a physical blow, piercing through his winter gear and stinging his cheeks fiercely. He stepped outside, the icy snow immediately biting into his skin, numbing his face and fingertips rapidly. His eyes methodically swept across the bleak, desolate landscape, searching for any sign of movement, threat, or presence hidden within the swirling storm. Shadows stretched and twisted ominously beneath the fierce storm's relentless assault, yet nothing concrete or definite revealed itself, only the endless white chaos that reigned supreme. He moved with extreme caution, carefully hugging the wall of the station to minimize exposure, rifle firmly at the ready for any threat. Every step he took was deliberate and measured, as if walking on fragile, brittle glass that could shatter at any moment. The wind howled fiercely around him, carrying an unsettling, faint metallic sound resembling claws dragging slowly and ominously across frozen ice, or some unidentifiable object scraping persistently along the snow-covered ground, distant yet eerily persistent. He strained his ears to distinguish this unnatural noise from the storm's deafening roar, trying to identify its source. The sound was rhythmic, almost like deliberate clawing or scratching, or perhaps the slow, consistent drag of a creature crawling across the snow's surface. Suddenly, a fleeting flicker of movement caught his eye again. This time, he saw it more clearly, a strange, irregular shape darting quickly between snowdrifts just beyond the reach of his flashlight's beam. His breath hitched in his chest, heart pounding louder than ever. The silhouette paused briefly, then disappeared behind a large, thick mound of snow, leaving only a fleeting impression of hurried, frantic motion. A chilling wave of dread slowly seeped into his bones, freezing him in place. Was it an animal lurking in the shadows? Or perhaps something more malevolent and unknown? The fierce chaos of the storm concealed many secrets, and the fluctuating shadows appeared almost alive, twisting and writhing with a strange, unsettling intelligence of their own. His finger hovered hesitantly over the trigger, caught between instinctive reaction and growing doubt about what he was facing. The scraping sound returned now much closer, echoing from behind the abandoned station, from the darkness that seemed to press inward with an ominous weight. He pressed his back tightly against the cold, damp wall, raising his rifle cautiously, ears straining to catch any sound. An agonizing silence stretched out painfully long, broken only by the relentless shriek of the wind howling through the night. Suddenly, a deliberate step echoed, coming closer now. His eyes darted toward the darkened corner of the building, searching intensely for any sign of movement or life in the shadows. The shadow flickered once more, this time with much greater clarity, a crouched silhouette, seemingly waiting and utterly patient. A sudden flicker of suspicion ignited within him, intensifying his focus. Was it a creature, a human being, or perhaps some fleeting hallucination, driven by the storm's overwhelming fury? His mind rapidly flashed through various possibilities, trying to assess what it could be, while his body remained tense and completely alert, ready to react at a moment's notice. Every nerve fiber in his body urged him to take action, yet he held himself back with great caution. Shadows in such turbulent weather were notoriously unpredictable, and the chaos of the storm subtly blurred the boundary between what was real and what was illusion. He held his breath, listening with heightened focus, but only the storm's relentless howling and shrieking wind responded in return. His eyes darted rapidly back and forth across the darkness, desperately searching for the faintest movement or the tiniest sign of life lurking in the shadows. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly, feeling like hours suspended in a tense, breathless stasis filled with anticipation. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind ripped through the station's porch, violently scattering loose debris and causing the windows to rattle loudly in their frames. The storm grew fiercer, as if responding directly to his rising anxiety and heightened sense of danger. The flickering shadows across the walls appeared to ripple and shift, elongating into strange shapes before retreating into the swirling darkness outside. A cold breeze brushed gently against his cheek, an almost unnoticeable soothing caress that nonetheless sent a shiver running down his spine. He lowered his rifle slightly, trying to steady his trembling hands under the weight of the tension that threatened to overwhelm him. His senses felt frayed, battered by the storm's relentless fury, but he was utterly certain of one thing: whatever was outside was not merely wind or snow. Something else was hiding in the shadows, something patiently waiting, silently watching, and perhaps preparing to strike at the moment he least expected. He turned back toward the station's entrance, pulling the door shut behind him with a muffled thud. As the lock clicked securely into place, he couldn't shake the overpowering feeling that the darkness outside was alive, a lurking entity that observed and waited patiently, ready to reveal itself once the chaos of the storm finally subsided. Shadows flickered unpredictably at the very edge of his peripheral vision, silent yet persistent reminders that the night's deepest secrets remained hidden and not yet fully uncovered. However, now his perspective had shifted significantly as the storm's relentless fury obscured the true danger lurking in the darkness, and the shadows no longer appeared merely as fleeting illusions in his mind. Something had undeniably changed. He had glimpsed a faint presence lurking nearby, and that unsettling knowledge would linger, fueling his growing paranoia, while also strengthening his unwavering resolve to stay alert. The station's cold, bleak walls, once a comforting refuge, now seemed fragile and vulnerable, as if both the storm and the shadows were collaborating in a silent, sinister game to pull him into their unseen world. He understood he could not remain here indefinitely. The storm would eventually weaken, and with its dissipating fury, the illusions and fears would fade away. Until that moment arrived, he would keep his vigil, patiently waiting for the precise moment when the darkness might finally unveil its true sinister face. His grip on the rifle tightened once more in readiness, and he steeled himself for whatever might emerge from the swirling white chaos beyond the station's fragile shelter. Derek stood perfectly motionless, eyes fixed on the distant flickering light shimmering faintly against the vast darkened horizon. The biting chill of the night air pressed relentlessly around him, silent, but for the faint whisper of snow sliding softly over itself, and the distant haunting crackle of frozen branches strained taut by the relentless wind. His breath formed ghostly clouds that quickly vanished into the freezing darkness, blending into the cold concealment. Behind him, the weak flickering glow of the abandoned station shimmered intermittently, yet his unwavering gaze remained fixated on that faint spark, as if it held the crucial key to salvation and escape. The light flickered irregularly, like a heartbeat struggling to maintain a steady rhythm amidst the enveloping darkness. Sometimes it pulsed brighter, then dimmed, almost vanishing entirely before reappearing unexpectedly in unpredictable bursts. Though it seemed insignificant, a tiny glow amid the vast empty wilderness, it felt monumental in this silence and cold. It served as a fragile beacon of hope amid despair, a possible sign that rescue might finally be near. His fingers trembled involuntarily as he reached in sight his worn coat, clutching the frayed fabric for steadiness and reassurance. Cold seeped through his gloves, yet it was the overwhelming mixture of hope and uncertainty that made his hand shake even more than the chill of the night. He harbored no certainty that this light was genuine, only a desperate lingering belief that it might be the salvation he so desperately needed. Could it possibly be a distant patrol passing by, a signal from some other stranded survivor or traveler stuck here? Or was it merely a fleeting illusion of the mind and hallucination born from extreme exhaustion and profound isolation? He was well aware of how fragile hope remained in these endless, silent hours, and how easily it could dissolve into a wave of bitter disappointment and despair. He gently pressed his gloved palm against the frost-covered window pane, carefully peering out into the enveloping darkness. The flickering glow danced erratically across the scene, casting fleeting ghostly shadows over the snowdrifts below. The wind sharpness increased, biting relentlessly through his insulating layers as he slowly moved toward the door, each step carefully calculated, his boots crunching softly on the icy crust beneath. Every motion was precise and deliberate. Every breath produced a visible cloud that mingled with the piercing, frigid air. The storm had calmed hours earlier, leaving behind a transformed, jagged landscape cratered and ridged, with snowdrifts sculpted into strange, unnatural shapes by the unyielding gales. Yet, amidst the chaos and destruction, this faint, distant beacon persisted resolutely, unwavering in the darkness. It called out to him like a lonely lighthouse shining through the thick, swirling storm clouds, guiding a stranded sailor safely toward shore amid howling winds and driving rain, offering hope and clarity amidst the darkness and icy cold. He hesitated for a moment, his hand trembling slightly as it hovered over the latch, and his eyes narrowed sharply as he focused intently on the faint glow. Doubt gnawed relentlessly at him. What if it was merely a mirage flickering in the distance? A fleeting reflection caused by shattered ice or the shimmering stars far away in the night sky? Or even worse, what if it was a deceptive trap, an illusion deliberately designed to lure him into deadly danger? Cold fear crept into his mind, whispering unsettling doubts that threatened to completely undermine his resolve and certainty. But another voice, calmer and more resolute, urged him to keep moving forward despite everything. The chance of rescue, of finally escaping this endless, isolating cycle of loneliness and despair, was simply too powerful to dismiss lightly. He vividly remembered Elena's voice from earlier, warning him sternly to stay in sight and wait patiently. Yet, in this moment, waiting felt like giving and like surrendering to defeat and giving up hope for a better future. Every second that he hesitated brought him a little closer to complete despair and hopelessness. His hand moved instinctively and quickly toward the small pouch hidden in his coat pocket, fingers trembling as they closed around the cold metallic surface of a flare. Carefully, he uncapped it, feeling the ignition strip crinkle slightly and give way under his touch. The night stretched ominously before him, silent, oppressive, and seemingly endless, yet there lingered a faint flicker of hope for salvation. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he readied himself for what was to come, then firmly pressed the trigger. A sharp, piercing crack shattered the silence as the flare burst into life, shooting a blazing orange arc high into the dark sky. Its intense glow expanded outward, casting a fiery glow that seemed to set the entire world ablaze with light and warmth. For a fleeting moment, the darkness seemed to hold its breath as the stark contrast between illumination and shadow became more vivid and dramatic than ever before. Derek observed as a plume of thick smoke billowed upward, lazily drifting into the frigid, crisp air, casting elongated, flickering shadows across the icy, frozen ground beneath him. He remained motionless and rooted to the spot, gazing intently at the distant point of the flare's faint flickering light. The flare flickered once more, pulsating with a stronger, more vigorous glow than before. A surge of hope blossomed within him, yet he remained cautious, aware of the fragile nature of optimism in such dire circumstances. Could this bright signal genuinely be a call for help? Or was it just an ephemeral illusion, a brief fleeting spark that outshone the surrounding darkness, only to vanish as quickly? A sudden gust of wind swept across the snowy landscape, sending icy snowflakes spiraling wildly into chaotic patterns around him, swirling unpredictably in the cold air. The smoke from the flare curled upward smoothly, gradually blending into the shadows cast by the night's mysterious darkness. His gaze lingered steadily on the glowing light, trying to decipher its true meaning. Was it holding still, or was it shifting and flickering erratically in the wind? Could he fully trust what his eyes were seeing in this uncertain moment? Time seemed to stretch into an endless stretch, each passing second heavily weighed down by mounting tension and uncertainty. His fingers clenched more tightly around the flare stick, causing his knuckles to blanch with strain as he carefully thought over his next crucial move in the silent, treacherous cold. The frigid air seeped deeply into his bones, yet despite the cold, a faint flicker of warmth sparked inside an ember of hope that refused to extinguish. Suddenly, the distant light grew brighter and pulsed more intensely, almost dazzling in its shining brilliance. It seemed to beat rhythmically, like a human heartbeat echoing through the deafening silence surrounding him. His chest tightened with a mixture of anxious anticipation and mounting dread, flooding his senses completely. What if this was truly the moment? What if the dawn would finally bring salvation, rescue, safety, and much-needed relief? He carefully took a cautious step forward, then another, each movement deliberate and controlled. The terrain was dangerous, covered with crusted snow and slick with treacherous ice, but his focus became sharper and more determined. Every step drew him closer to that distant glow, pushing into the unknown that might hold his salvation or lead to his ultimate disappointment. As he pressed on, he cast a quick glance back toward the faint glow of the station, serving as a silent reminder of the world he was attempting to leave behind. The flickering, uncertain light called him forward, offering a glimmer of hope amid the enveloping shadows and darkness. His firm grip on the flare tightened as he prepared himself to follow the faint signal into the unknown, into whatever mysteries or dangers might lie beyond. The wind howled fiercely once more, swirling snowflakes into chaotic swirling spirals that danced erratically around him. The smoke from the flare curled upward, blending and dissipating into the night's dark shadows. His eyes narrowed sharply as he tried to carefully interpret the faint glow. In the distance, was it steady and reliable, or did it flicker and shift unpredictably? Could he trust it as a guiding light? Suddenly, a sharp gust of wind ripped loose a tiny ice chip from a nearby tree branch, sending it tumbling noisily into the snow beneath. The unexpected sound broke his concentration momentarily, causing a brief distraction. He paused briefly, listening intently, then resumed his cautious, deliberate approach toward the mysterious light. The flickering glow pulsed again, brighter this time, almost resembling a heartbeat echoing in the stillness of the night's cold silence. His mind was rapidly racing, carefully evaluating all the different possibilities before him. Was this faint glow genuinely a sign of help drawing near, or was it simply another fleeting illusion designed to deceive him? The freezing cold pressed tightly against his body, yet his resolve became increasingly unwavering and firm. He suddenly understood that remaining passive and waiting without taking action was no longer a viable option. If he truly wanted to ensure his survival, he had to make a move. He deliberately took another step forward, then another, each movement filled with purpose and determination. The distant glow grew progressively clearer and more distinct, almost as if it was responding directly to his determined progress. His heart pounded loudly, partly from the physical exertion and partly from the overwhelming hope that this light might be the salvation he desperately sought. The night around him seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, but inside, a new sense of determination and hope burned even brighter than before. Finally, the distant light pulsed one last time, shining brighter than ever, almost blinding in its intensity, signaling that help was imminent. It appeared to synchronize perfectly with his heartbeat, serving as a rhythmic call for help amidst the silence. Derek's chest tightened with a mixture of mounting anticipation and deep-seated fear, as if his very life depended on this moment. Was this the precise instant he had been tirelessly waiting for, or merely a cruel mirage, a fleeting illusion that taunted him before disappearing into the surrounding darkness? He hesitated only briefly, gathering his courage before stepping forward with renewed determination. Each of his cautious movements was met with unwavering resolve. The icy, treacherous ground threatened to slip beneath his boots at any moment, yet he pressed on steadily, motivated by the hope that this faint, flickering beacon would ultimately lead him safely out of danger. As he moved silently into the shadows, he cast a final, lingering glance back at the station's dim, fading glow. It served as a poignant reminder of the world he was leaving behind, a place filled with uncertainty, peril, and unresolved questions. Now, the only guide trusted was this pulsating, fragile, light and uncertain flicker of hope that refused to extinguish despite the darkness surrounding him. The wind howled even more fiercely, tearing through the air and whipping snow into frantic, swirling spirals. Yet Derek remained resolutely focused on the distant, flickering glow. His grip on the flare was steady and unwavering, as he kept his eyes fixed on the faint light, trusting in the promise it symbolized. No matter what challenges or dangers awaited, whether a fortunate rescue or the threat of even greater peril, he was firmly committed to following this signal through the oppressive darkness, towards the uncertain dawn that loomed beyond the distant horizon. The otherwise deafening silence of the icy landscape was suddenly shattered by a loud, distant cracking sound that echoed ominously across the frozen terrain, warning of an imminent structural collapse. Crouched beside the window, Derek stiffened instinctively as he gazed out at the horizon, his body tense. The snow and ice covering the distant mountains shimmered with strange, unnatural flickers, while dark fissures began to snake across the icy surface, spreading rapidly and unpredictably. His heart clenched with a deep sense of foreboding. This was no ordinary thaw or natural melting process. Elena burst into the station hurriedly, her face streaked with snow and biting wind, her features etched with urgency and concern. She slammed the door shut with force behind her, catching her breath sharply. "Derek, we need to move immediately," she said briskly, her eyes darting anxiously toward the window, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. "The ice is breaking apart at a much quicker rate than we initially predicted. If we remain here any longer, there's a high risk that we could be completely buried alive beneath the collapsing ice." He quickly got up, instinctively looking around the room for any useful supplies, his mind scrambling to process the rapidly unfolding situation. "What's causing this unexpected acceleration?" he asked, voice tense and strained, trying to understand the sudden change. "The temperature hasn't dropped abruptly or significantly, so why is the ice melting so much faster?" She shook her head with a grim expression. "It's the advancing warm front moving in much sooner than we anticipated. The meltwater collecting beneath the ice is pooling and exerting immense pressure, forcing the existing cracks to open wider dramatically. As a result, the entire glacier is becoming increasingly unstable and at risk of completely collapsing. Yesterday, we observed the warning signs, tiny cracks in the walls, the snow gradually shifting and melting, but I never anticipated that the situation would escalate so rapidly and become so dire so quickly." Derek moved cautiously toward the door, hesitating briefly as a deep, ominous rumble vibrated through the ground beneath their feet, signaling the mounting danger. Outside, the entire landscape was rapidly transforming into a chaotic scene filled with flowing slush, cracking ice, and fractured surfaces. The horizon flickered ominously with a sickly greenish glow, which was the reflection of the melting icy surface, combined with the distant thunderous crashes of calving icebergs breaking apart. "We're rapidly running out of time," Elena urged in a low but pressing voice. "The station's foundation wasn't built to withstand this kind of extreme event. The ground is already shifting beneath us. If we stay here, we'll be swallowed by the chaos." He nodded solemnly, feeling the heavy importance behind her words settle deeply into his bones. "Is there any way to reinforce the structure, to buy us a few more critical minutes before it collapses completely?" She grimaced deeply, her face contorting with concern. "The damage is irreparable. It's beyond fixing now. The walls are crumbling, and the ice surrounding the station is splitting apart and fracturing. Reinforcements would be entirely pointless and ineffective at this point. We must evacuate immediately before the entire structure collapses under the mounting pressure." A heavy, tense silence enveloped them, pierced only by the distant thunderous cracking sounds and the faint roar of the melting glacier. Outside, the landscape unfolded in a swirling chaos of constantly shifting whites and grays, as the relentless advance of destruction showed no signs of slowing down or stopping. Derek's stomach clenched tightly with fear and dread, but amidst the panic, a faint flicker of clarity sparked within him. "Gather whatever you can find," he said quietly, his voice remaining calm and steady despite the chaos. "We leave in 10 minutes. Elena sharply nodded in agreement, then swiftly moved toward the storage room to gather essential supplies. Derek hurried after her, grabbing his coat along with a few remaining necessities, including an extra flashlight, some dried food packets, and a small compact first aid kit. The biting cold continued to seep stubbornly through the walls, serving as a harsh reminder that their safe haven was no longer reliable or secure. As they prepared to leave, a loud, deep tremor resonated throughout the station, causing the walls to shudder violently and the floor to groan ominously under the strain. Outside, the water level had dangerously risen, creeping steadily closer and gently lapping at the base of the structure, posing a serious threat of breaching their last line of safety. Is there any way to signal for help? Elena asked quietly, her voice hushed with concern as her eyes carefully scanned the dark, shadowy room. Derek shook his head despairingly, replying, "No radios, no satellite links. Everything's completely dead. We find ourselves entirely cut off and isolated from everything else." She examined him carefully, her eyes scanning him intently for any signs of doubt or hesitation. "Then our only choice is to trust our instincts completely," she said urgently. "We need to find higher ground to get a better vantage point and avoid the most unstable areas. The terrain is changing rapidly and unpredictably. We can't rely on any previous knowledge of the landscape." He furrowed his brow, tightening his fists in determination. "Follow me immediately. We must move quickly and decisively now." Together, they navigated swiftly through the narrow, shadowed corridors, the walls shuddering with each tremor that shook the entire building. The floor beneath their feet groaned loudly with each step. Overhead, the ceiling threatened to collapse at any moment, creating an ever-present danger. Every tiny crack and unsettling creak served as a clear warning sign. Outside, the rapidly melting landscape transformed into an unyielding, constantly shifting battlefield of ice and water. Reaching the entrance, Derek quickly threw open the heavy weathered door. A powerful gust of icy wind and spray immediately hit them, carrying the sharp scent of melting snow mixed with rushing water. The scene beyond was a nightmarish, vision-cracked, fractured ice, flowing slush, and the distant horizon illuminated by the eerie, unnatural glow of the ongoing thaw. "Look at that," Elena whispered, her voice trembling with a sense of urgent alarm. "The ice is breaking apart even faster than we initially expected. We probably have only minutes before the floodwaters reach the station and cause catastrophic flooding." Derek stared intently at the chaos unfolding around them, feeling a complex mixture of helplessness and determined resolve. "There's a ridge inland higher ground nearby, with a safe elevation for us to escape to. We must reach our destination before the rising water completely isolates us." She nodded decisively, her expression resolute. "Then that's our clear objective." They carefully traversed the perilous terrain, slippery and uneven underfoot, alive with the ominous sounds of cracking ice and rushing turbulent currents. Every step was a risky gamble, as the ground beneath their feet constantly shifted, and enormous ice slabs loomed dangerously close to toppling over. The landscape was continuously transforming itself, turning what once was familiar into a perilous maze filled with hidden dangers. Suddenly, a colossal cracking noise shattered the silence behind them. Derek quickly spun around, eyes wide with alarm as a massive sheet of ice snapped loose from the glacier, crashing into the freezing water below with a thunderous splash. The deafening sound echoed through the air, brutally reminding them of the unstable and fragile nature of their environment. "We need to move quickly." Elena shouted loudly, gripping his arm firmly and yanking him forward with urgency. They continued pushing ahead, the rising floodwaters now pressing against their heels, the swift current tugging at loose snow patches and floating ice chunks around them. The horizon glowed with a shimmering light from melting ice, creating the illusion that the entire world was slowly disintegrating into utter chaos and dissolution. Upon reaching the base of the ridge, they began scrambling upward, each step requiring immense effort as they fought against the treacherous, slick, and unstable surface beneath their feet. When they finally arrived at a more solid patch of higher ground, they paused to catch their breath, casting urgent glances back at the station and the increasingly crumbling landscape behind them. The water had already started encroaching upon the station's perimeter, swallowing the lower structures and gradually creeping closer with each moment. The entire area was a constantly changing mass, vividly demonstrating the relentless fury of nature's power. The once sturdy, solid foundation was now a fractured mosaic of shattered ice and flowing water, a chaotic scene of destruction. Elena turned to Derek, her face tight with fierce determination. "We're safe for now, but the station's completely gone." We urgently need to develop a comprehensive plan without any delay. He turned to her, his eyes dark and heavy with the burden of their dire situation, conveying the urgency that filled the air. We should remain here for now, carefully monitoring the water level. If the river continues to rise significantly, we will undoubtedly have to seek shelter elsewhere, somewhere safer. She instinctively pulled her coat tighter around herself, her eyes fixed intently on the distant horizon, where the faint glow of melting ice shimmered and flickered like a dying ember struggling to stay alive. The landscape around them kept shifting and unraveling before their eyes, amplifying their fragile hope for a rescue that seemed increasingly uncertain. The only thing they could be certain of in that moment was that the chaos and upheaval were far from over and that the situation was only escalating. Both of them silently understood the world they once relied on, stable and predictable, had now become unpredictable, perilous, and unforgiving in its new reality. The ongoing thaw marked merely the beginning of a relentless, daunting struggle against forces far beyond their control. The collapse of the glacier was imminent, bringing with it the terrifying possibility that everything familiar and known to them might be irrevocably lost forever. The relentless surge of water pressed steadily and mercilessly against the fragile foundation of the station, its rhythmic, powerful swell ominously deliberate as it continued to rise higher, threatening collapse. Meanwhile, the howling wind tore ferociously through the frigid, icy air, carrying a piercing mocking scream that echoed loudly, drowning out the distant ominous groan of shifting ice blocks and fractured glaciers. Inside, the atmosphere thickened with tense anxiety. Every breath was shallow, hurried, and ragged, as the entire structure trembled under the relentless fury of nature's destructive force. Derek moved quickly but cautiously, his eyes unwaveringly fixed on the steadily advancing waterline. His hands trembled not from the biting cold, but from the heavy weight of the crucial decision pressing heavily on him. The floodwaters threatened to engulf everything in their path, transforming the station into a drifting ruin lost at sea. The windows rattled violently, with shadows flickering erratically in the dim flickering light, mimicking the chaos and turmoil raging outside. He understood that their only chance of survival depended entirely on the carefully devised plan that Marcus and Sophia had meticulously crafted. Their timely arrival had sparked a faint flicker of hope and optimism, yet every second wasted only increased the danger and the risk of disaster. The escape route was perilous, a narrow, unstable corridor leading toward the ice ridge, a fragile, icy bridge suspended over the surging, turbulent waters below. Any accidental mistake or miscalculation could instantly send them tumbling into the freezing, treacherous, icy abyss below. "Are you ready?" Marcus's voice shattered through the surrounding chaos, tense yet remarkably steady and composed. His face wore a serious, determined expression, and his eyes steadily scanned the flooded chamber, searching for any signs of imminent structural failure or impending collapse. Sophia stood close by, clutching a tightly wrapped bundle of essential supplies, her gaze flickering anxiously back and forth between the rising water and the locked door ahead. Derek nodded firmly and decisively, swallowing hard to hide his nervousness. "We need to move right now. The water's rising much faster than we originally anticipated," he stated urgently. Marcus stepped forward swiftly and confidently, unlocking the door with a precise, efficient motion. Beyond this door stretched a dim, narrow corridor, dimly illuminated only by a flickering lantern, whose weak and wavering glow struggled to push back the overwhelming darkness surrounding them. The stale, musty air inside the confined space carried a damp, earthy scent, mingled with cold metal and damp wood. The narrow, claustrophobic passage stretched out ahead like a thin corridor between the rising floodwaters on one side and the shadowy, mysterious depths beyond. He took the first cautious step forward, then paused briefly, glancing back at Derek with a serious expression. "Stay close to me. No slipping or losing your footing," he warned firmly. Derek followed carefully behind, each step deliberate and cautious, aware of the treacherously slick surface. The floor beneath their feet was coated with faintly shimmering ice crystals that caught the faint light. The distant roar of rushing water grew increasingly louder, echoing through the tunnel, as if a predatory beast stalking its prey in the shadows. Every sound around them was amplified: the dripping of melting ice, the creaking of the station's aging walls, and their own labored breathing echoing in the confined space. Sophia moved close behind them, her grip tight on the supplies and her eyes scanning their surroundings carefully. Her eyes darted quickly around, scanning meticulously for any signs of structural weakness or instability. The corridor swayed gently with each gust of wind that gusted through, making maintaining balance quite precarious and challenging. The ominous silence was only broken periodically by the faint cracking sounds of ice overhead, as if the entire frozen landscape seemed to be holding its breath in tense anticipation. Suddenly, a loud, alarming creak reverberated throughout the tunnel, grabbing everyone's attention. Marcus immediately froze in place, his facial expression tightening with concern. The ceiling above was visibly sagging, with ice and snow bowing ominously, threatening to collapse at any precise moment. Without hesitation, he sharply signaled everyone to increase their pace and move quickly. "Be alert for the weak spots ahead," he whispered urgently and sharply. "We simply can't remain here any longer." Derek felt a cold knot of fear tighten painfully in his stomach as the gravity of their situation sank in. Every measured movement had to be executed with utmost precision. Even a single slip could prove to be fatal. As they advanced cautiously, a section of the ceiling unexpectedly collapsed with a thunderous crash, showering them with shards of ice and fragments of debris. The others instinctively flinched, but Marcus continued forward steadily, his voice calm and unwavering. "Keep going. No hesitation. Stay focused." The passageways grew even narrower, forcing them into a crawling crawl over a delicate, brittle patch of ice that seemed on the verge of shattering beneath their steps. Sophia trembled slightly, clutching the supplies more tightly as she carefully navigated this treacherous terrain. Outside, the wind's howling intensified into a deafening shriek, an unrelenting warning of the storm's destructive fury. In the distance, the faint silhouette of the ice ridge materialized, an uncertain, shimmering barrier looming against the dark, menacing sky. It represented their only safe haven, a slender strip of firm ground, rising above the surging flood that threatened to engulf everything. But the final stretch proved to be the most perilous of all. The ice sheet was heavily fractured, with sharp, jagged cracks spreading out in a complex, web-like pattern across its surface. Almost there, Derek whispered urgently, his voice tense with anticipation. Marcus was the first to reach the edge, crawling cautiously onto the icy crest before reaching out a steady hand. "Come on, we can push through this together." Sophia hesitated briefly, her eyes flickering nervously back toward the tumultuous waters below, which threatened to engulf everything in an instant. Her fingers brushed against Marcus's hand, and with a gentle but firm pull, she was pulled onto the ridge just as a loud, ominous cracking sound reverberated behind them. The section of ice they had just crossed groaned loudly, serving as a stark warning of imminent collapse. "Run!" Marcus yelled, his voice filled with urgent determination. They hurriedly pushed forward, the relentless wind tearing fiercely at their clothing, while the biting snow stung mercilessly across their faces. Beneath the fragile surface, the floodwaters raged fiercely beneath the thin sheet of ice, constantly threatening to fracture at any unpredictable moment. Their footing wavered on the uneven, treacherous terrain, each step carrying the risk of a dangerous fall, yet they stubbornly continued onward, their eyes focused intently on the distant, flickering horizon. The rugged ridge beneath their feet trembled and shifted with each gust of wind, snow and ice trembling in a fragile balance. The storm's ferocious rage seemed to reach its peak at that very instant, a violent tempest of howling wind and relentless water, testing every ounce of their courage and determination. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as a loud, sharp crack suddenly sliced through the air, revealing the alarming ripple along the verge of the ridge, dangerously close to giving way. Almost there, Derek shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the chaos surrounding them. Without warning, a section of ice beneath Marcus suddenly splintered apart with a deafening crashing roar, vividly illustrating how perilous their situation truly was. His face furrowed with panic as he lunged desperately forward, urgently trying to regain his unstable balance. The ground beneath his feet suddenly gave way unexpectedly, and he was pulled into the freezing icy depths with a loud splash. "No," Sophia cried out loudly, instinctively reaching her hands toward him. Derek lunged forward with all his strength, grabbing Marcus's arm tightly in a desperate attempt to save him. The man's fingers slipped, cold and trembling from the freezing water. For a tense, heart-stopping moment, they hung there, suspended perilously between survival and imminent disaster. Then, with immense effort and strained muscles, Derek yanked Marcus onto the solid ridge, pulling him back from the very edge of catastrophe. The two of them collapsed onto the icy surface, gasping frantically for air, their hearts pounding loudly in their chests. The fierce storm continued to rage around them, but the immediate and life-threatening danger had finally been avoided. The rising floodwaters, although still menacing and unpredictable, had been successfully held back for the moment. Sophia placed her hand firmly over her chest, visibly trembling from the shock and fatigue. "Is everyone all right? Are you all safe?" she asked urgently, struggling to steady her voice amidst the chaos. Marcus coughed harshly, his voice hoarse and strained. "Just barely making it. But at least we're still alive," for now he rasped with caution, trying to catch his breath. Derek glanced back at the crumbling ice behind them, then shifted his gaze toward the dangerous, shimmering expanse of ice and water ahead. The narrow escape had granted them a fleeting, fragile moment of relief and hope, yet the environment around them remained perilous and unpredictable. The foundation of the station trembled once more, shaking slightly beneath their feet, while the wind's final hauntingly cold note signaled an impending disaster that they could not yet escape. They shared exhausted, wary glances, fully aware that their survival now depended critically on their next, carefully considered move. The fierce storm continued to rage unabated, with the relentless water still threatening to overwhelm them, and the delicate ice beneath their feet remaining only temporarily stable. Their situation had shifted significantly. They had successfully escaped the flooded corridor, but now faced the danger of the unstable ice ridge that could crack at any moment, amidst the ongoing chaos surrounding them. A new realization had dawned among the group. They could no longer depend solely on their original plan or assumptions. The storm's violent fury, combined with the collapsing ice, had starkly revealed that their circumstances were far more perilous than they initially believed. Their previous confidence in a straightforward escape was now replaced by an acute awareness of the persistent danger. As they paused to catch their breath and gather their thoughts, Sophia's gaze grew firmer and more determined. She understood that their survival depended not only on reaching the ice ridge, but also on identifying a safer, more secure route, possibly by improvising a new pathway or utilizing nearby debris to reinforce their footing. Marcus, visibly shaken but attentive, nodded slowly in agreement, realizing that their immediate priority was to reach higher ground to reassess their options carefully. The howling storm persisted with unrelenting force, but now they grasped that each next step had to be more strategic and cautious. The narrow ice ridge merely offered temporary refuge. The real challenge lay ahead, finding a way to fully escape the chaos, to reach a safe zone beyond the storm's destructive reach, and ensure their survival. At that critical moment, their outlook on the situation suddenly changed dramatically. The threat was no longer merely the rising floodwaters or the collapsing ice sheets, but now the inherently unpredictable and volatile nature of the environment itself. They had come to understand that survival depended on their ability to adapt swiftly to unforeseen circumstances, to trust deeply in one another's skills and instincts, and to seize every fleeting moment of opportunity that presented itself. Their connection, forged through this harrowing experience, grew even stronger as they prepared to move forward once more, fully aware that the most challenging part of their journey still lay ahead. The storm continued to rage fiercely around them, yet they carried with them a renewed sense of determination and inner strength, born from the painful realization that their situation had changed permanently and irreversibly, and that only decisive and immediate action could increase their chances of survival. As the first light of dawn seeped through the jagged cracks in the broken glass, it cast narrow wavering streaks of pale gold across the debris-covered ground. Outside, the once vast and seemingly endless icy wilderness had been forever altered by the fury of the storm. What used to be an uninterrupted expanse of frozen terrain was now fragmented, with broken ice floes drifting aimlessly on dark swirling waters. The storm had spent itself overnight, leaving behind a delicate, fragile mosaic of melting ice patches and shifting currents elements that threatened to reshape and destabilize the environment once again. Derek moved carefully and deliberately, his boots crunching softly on the uneven surface of debris, ice fragments, and snow that now cluttered the landscape. His eyes carefully scanned the distant horizon, remaining highly alert for any subtle signs of movement or life amidst the surrounding chaos. The atmosphere was heavy with a thick, damp, and cold mist, subtly tinged with the faint, salty aroma seeping through the cracks and crevices in the debris. Each breath he took created a visible cloud of condensation that hovered for a moment before slowly dissipating into the biting, gusty wind. His heart beat steadily, embodying a silent mixture of relief and deep fatigue relief that the relentless storm had finally subsided, yet exhaustion from days of continuous struggle still lingered within him. He moved closer to what remained of the station's doorway, now just a jagged, broken outline, starkly contrasting against the bleak and overcast sky. Around him, discarded twisted metal, shattered glass fragments, torn insulation, and debris littered the area, clear testaments to the storm's overwhelming destructive force. As he paused for a moment to gather his thoughts, a faint, almost imperceptible movement caught his eye. A small trembling shape pushing through the wreckage, clearly struggling to get any further. It was the injured pup, limping feebly on a swollen paw stained with dried blood, its fur matted and tangled, dirt and ice crusted on its trembling and fragile frame. The creature's eyes fluttered open slowly as Derek carefully knelt down beside it, remaining cautious yet immensely gentle in his approach. His gloved hands gently brushed aside the snow, ice, and scattered debris that covered the tiny, fragile face, revealing a small, vulnerable expression marked by pain and exhaustion. The pup's shallow, labored breaths betrayed its delicate, weakened condition, but a faint spark of recognition lit up in its bright, pleading eyes. Derek hesitated briefly, then extended his hand very slowly and deliberately to avoid startling the delicate creature. With great care, he gently lifted the tiny pup into his arms, feeling the softness and frailty of its small body. It whimpered softly and instinctively pressed into his chest, seeking comfort. Despite the relentless cold and harsh environment surrounding them, a subtle warmth emanated from the small living form pressed close against him, an almost imperceptible flicker of life amid the desolation. His thoughts scrambled. How long had the little one been stranded here? Did it survive the brutal storm that swept through? Is there any hope left for other creatures in this shattered, broken world? A sudden and fierce gust of wind gusted unexpectedly, rattling loose panels and stirring a swirling flurry of snow, which forced Derek to tighten his grip even more firmly on the young pup, shielding it from the biting, frigid cold. He glanced upward briefly, observing how the faint rays of the rising sun struggled desperately to break through the thick, heavy cloud cover. For a fleeting moment, a faint flicker of hope appeared, a fragile ember amid the vast icy desolation that surrounded him. He stood up slowly, his eyes fixed intently on the distant water, where the ice was melting at a rapidly increasing rate. The entire landscape was transforming right before his eyes, becoming increasingly unstable and unpredictable with each passing minute. The fractured ice floes shifted, collided, and groaned, creating a deafening cacophony of cracking sounds that echoed across the vast frozen expanse. Beneath the thin layer of melting ice, concealed currents churned violently, threatening to swallow up the remaining patches of land and ice formations entirely. The sharp realization struck him suddenly: everything he had fought so hard to preserve was now gone beyond recovery. The station, supplies, safety, every element reduced to wreckage and ruin. Only memories remained, faint echoes of a world that once seemed steadfast and secure, now lost forever. Despite the surrounding debris and utter chaos, one thing remained absolutely clear: the small injured creature cradled gently in his arms. His eyes shifted from the turbulent, restless water surface to the modest shelter he could find amid the wreckage. The terrain was too unstable and treacherous to venture far, but he desperately needed to find a safe, sheltered spot where he could tend to the wounded pup. Carefully and cautiously, he moved toward a partially collapsed section of the outer wall, which provided enough cover from the most intense gusts of wind and falling debris. He softly laid the helpless pup on a patch of flattened, pristine snow, then carefully rummaged through his coat pockets, retrieving small bits of cloth and a tiny piece of dried meat from his rations. Gently tearing a strip of cloth, he skillfully wrapped it around the injured pup's paw, which caused the animal to whimper softly but remained still in his grasp. Its bright, expressive eyes fluttered closed momentarily, seeking comfort and warmth in his touch. Derek's jaw clenched tightly, a mixture of guilt, concern, and quiet resolve hardening his features. He had no medical kit or antiseptic supplies, only his instinct, determination, and fragile hope guiding every action. He then settled himself beside the vulnerable creature, leaning his back against the cold, rough wall, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on the turbulent, restless water surface beyond. The silence was incredibly thick and heavy, broken only by the distant cracking sound of shifting ice and the occasional gust of cold wind sweeping through the barren landscape. The storm had finally passed, but its aftermath still lingered deeply, leaving the environment on the verge of further upheaval and chaos. Time itself seemed to have come to a standstill, with each minute stretching out endlessly into an eternity of quiet despair, mixed with faint glimmers of fragile hope. Derek's thoughts began to drift, contemplating just how delicate and precarious survival was here in this frozen wasteland, how quickly everything could be lost in an instant. However, as he watched the pup's tiny chest slowly rise and fall with each breath, a small yet fierce spark of determination ignited inside him. Suddenly, the pup's eyes fluttered open once more, meeting his gaze with a silent plea for help. Derek hesitantly reached out and gently stroked the little creature's soft, tiny head. The creature's tail twitched faintly, a subtle but powerful sign of life amid the wreckage and desolation surrounding them. The distant horizon was painted with a soft pink hue of the sunrise, casting a muted, delicate glow that illuminated the fractured ice and scattered water in a fragile, almost ethereal light. A new day had gently begun, delicate, uncertain, yet imbued with an unspoken promise of hope and renewal. The fierce storm had finally passed, leaving behind a dramatically transformed landscape, vulnerable, unpredictable, and harsh, yet still pulsating with life. Derek took a deep, steadying breath, the cold, icy air filling his lungs and awakening his senses anew. He understood that the path before him would be laden with danger and challenges, with each step uncertain and fraught with risk. However, in that quiet moment, a renewed sense of purpose and determination settled firmly within him. The fragile breathing life cradled in his arms served as a powerful reminder that even in the bleakest, most desolate corners of the world, hope and resilience could still endure. He shifted his position slightly, preparing to move forward cautiously. Every step would be taken with intention and mindfulness, and every decision made with careful deliberation. Beyond this icy wilderness and desolate terrain, what awaited was unpredictable, perhaps salvation and safety, or perhaps additional hardships and struggles. But for now, his primary focus was to protect this vulnerable creature, nurture the faint but persistent flicker of life within, and face whatever challenges lay ahead with quiet, unwavering resolve.